Yeah, most people join about 15 minutes into the thing actually, so we'll take it from there. Good to go, Alex?
Yes, all set.
Hello, everybody. I'd like to wish you all a very good morning here from Ann Arbor in Michigan in the USA. A good afternoon to those of you who are joining us from the UK, and a good evening to colleagues who are joining us from India. I'm delighted you could join us for today's webinar on the farmers movement. My name is Arvind-Pal Mandair, and I teach in the Department of Asian Languages and Cultures at the University of Michigan. This is the second in our regular webinar series in Sikh and Punjab studies, and this seminar happens 3 times a year in January, April, and September. The recordings of the first webinar are available on our website, and the link to that will be provided in the chat. And henceforth, the webinars will be co-hosted between the University of California, Irvine, and the University of Michigan. And to that end, I'd like to introduce my co-host and colleague from the University of California, Irvine, Anneeth Kaur Hundle. Dr. Hundle is the Dunkor Sahota Presidential Chair in Sikh Studies, and she teaches in the Department of Anthropology at the University of California, Irvine. So I'm going to hand over to Anneeth briefly.
Thank you, Arvind, so much. I also want to extend a warm welcome to everyone that's joining us on the webinar today. Good morning from here in Irvine, California. As Arvind mentioned, UCI and the University of Michigan Ann Arbor are working together to resuscitate a sort of historical United Kingdom British academic tradition of organizing quarterly Sikh and Punjab studies research webinars. The aim of this webinar is to bring together scholars of Punjab studies broadly across India and Pakistan, which is important. Sikh studies, scholars who work on the Punjab and Sikh studies diaspora, and also folks in the community. So a key component of this webinar is making sure that we're building connections between academics in the university as well as community leaders and intellectuals around the world globally and in the diaspora. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic and ensuing transition to Zoom academia, this has allowed us to convene these webinars and to have these sort of transnational, transcontinental, transregional meetings to bring together all of us in this more global format. And so we're very excited about this. As Arvind mentioned, this is the second one, and this will be a quarterly event. The topic of this spring 2021 webinar is reassessing the farmers' protest movement. While there's been much analysis and discussion of the protest or the morcha as it is unfolding, and we've all been tuning in to a number of Zoom webinars and conversations on social media platforms, what we wanted to do with this webinar is to continue that assessment of the movement and the state of protest in India as it is unfolding. But we also want to ask, what can we expect and anticipate 5 years down the road from now in regards to activism, politics, elections, religious, caste, class, gender issues in the Punjab, the relationship between Punjab and the central government, and also thinking more broadly about regional South Asian and global geopolitics. We look forward to engaging presentations and discussions on the ongoing protest movement as we stand in solidarity with the farmers and workers in protest encampments, and as a really horrific and tragic COVID-19 crisis is unfolding in India and escalating at the moment. And we're so pleased to be able to have guests from India with us today as well. And finally, I just want to acknowledge Alex Prosi, who's done a wonderful job with administrative and research support to help us to put on these webinars. and also Nicholas Moore at the University of Michigan, who's offered us a lot of tech support today. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Arvind to introduce our guests.
Thank you, Anneeth. And without further ado, I'd like to get the proceedings underway. We have 4 distinguished speakers today, 2 from India, 1 from the US and 1 from the UK. Our first speaker will be Dr. Himanshu, and he will be followed by Dr. Kumool Abbi from Punjab University, Chandigarh. And then our final 2 speakers will be Dr. Navyug Gill from Paterson University, and our final speaker will be Dr. Jasdev from the Sikh Human Rights Group in the US, in the UK. So I'm going to start by introducing our first speaker, Dr. Himanshu. Himanshu is an associate professor in economics at the Center for Economic Studies and Planning at the School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University. He is also visiting fellow at the Center de Sciences Humaines, New Delhi. He has held visiting fellowships at the London School of Economics. He's been a British Academy Senior Visiting Fellow and C.R. Parekh Fellow. His primary area of research is development economics, with a focus on issues relating to poverty, inequality, employment, food security, rural development, and agrarian change. His current research interests revolve around poverty and inequality in India, structural change, and changing patterns of employment and livelihood in rural India. He's been involved with various government committees, including the Expert Group on the Measurement of Poverty, the Tendulkar Committee, the National Statistical Commission, the Reserve Bank of India, National Human Rights Commission, Ministry of Rural Development, and Housing and Urban Poverty Alleviation. His recent publications include How Lives Change, Palanpur, India and Development Economics, with Nicholas Stern and Peter Langeau. And this was published by Oxford University Press, London, 2018. The book is based on the longest longitudinal survey of a village, Palanpur, a village in West Uttar Pradesh, which has been surveyed intensively 7 times, starting from the first survey in 1957. He has been the principal investigator for the 6th and 7th round of Palanpur surveys, along with Nicholas Stern and Peter Langeau. Himanshu is a regular contributor to various media publications, including television. He writes a fortnightly column on issues related to development in Mint newspaper. He's received the Sanjay Thakur Young Economist Award of the Indian Society of Labour Economics and Personalities. Himanshu received his PhD in economics from JNU, Delhi. I'm going to hand over the floor to Himanshu. Our first 2 speakers will be speaking for 30 minutes each, and then we'll have a Q&A for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Arvind and Anneeth, for having me here. Honestly, I'm not an expert on Sikh studies, but very much been following the agrarian protest that has been going on currently in India, outside Delhi, but also in other parts of the country. And in fact, I wanted to bring down the whole presentation that I want to make into 3 different parts of it. I mean, 3 of the 3 different parts, I mean, 2 of them have a link in a sense to what is happening in general to agriculture in the country itself. And 1 part is something which is very much specific to Punjab as such, and I'll come to that in the last part. Let me just begin with by saying that in the last 60 to 70 years, agriculture in India had changed dramatically, and it had changed in Punjab as well. It had changed in Western UP, it had changed in other parts. And my favorite anecdote in that sense has always been not looking at this protest, but looking at the protest in the last 3 to 4 years. And if you remember it, I mean, if you have been following what is going on in India, there have been large scale protests by the Marathas, the community, agricultural community in Maharashtra, the Patels in Gujarat, who are again a very proud agricultural community. And just like the Sikhs or the Jats can claim to have been really the forbearers of the Green Revolution, the Patels have been very much instrumental as far as the White Revolution is concerned, which is the Milk Revolution, it's livestock revolution. And third one is the Jats, who have been equally strong participants and well known, I mean, well regarded as cultivators in the same area in Haryana and Western UP. In all the three communities in the last, if you look at it in the last 5 years or 7 years, but also last 10 years, for example, there have been huge protests. And these huge protests have actually spilled over to the street. Sometimes they've gone into turned violent form. And unfortunately, the demand that coming from these three primary agricultural communities is coming as a demand for reservation in the government jobs, which is very surprising because these are the communities which are, again, one of the most industrious, and I say it with pride, most innovative in a sense, and well-known, well-regarded as cultivator communities which have been really been at the forefront of agricultural revolution in the country. That has been the situation, that the younger generation is now fighting with the government on the streets, protesting for non-governmental jobs or governmental jobs or whatever kind of job that is available. And this is happening across the three, and I'm just mentioning the three dominant communities in the countries. And these three, all three of them are regarded in their own ways. So agriculture had changed. And agriculture had changed in three different, again, ways, led by what I call the three M's, basically. One is the mechanization. A large-scale mechanization following the Green Revolution has led to a situation where agriculture is no longer absorbing labor. In the sense, it is no longer employing younger population, no longer employing people in the villages as it used to be, because machines can do jobs which are possible by 4 or 5 people by just one single machine, and can run work for 24 hours without breaks. The second is something which is a part of the global trend, but in India it has accelerated in the last 30 years, which is what I call the monetization part of it. Monetization is something which is not just the monetization of the output market, but monetization also of the input market, which is where I think which has been much faster than, say, for example, the output market. Almost every input that you are using now in the agricultural sector is traded, right from water to labor to everything that you're so much dependent on the market. And that is why the dependence on credit has also increased, because you need money as an advance to start cultivating or to invest in the cultivation sector. And the third is the diversification of the crop basket, which is now, which has happened in essence in many of the parts of the country, where our own agricultural system is no longer insulated from international price transmissions. We are very much part of the global network. So what is happening to global markets has an impact both in terms of input cost as well as in terms of output cost with the domestic economy. And that's something which was inevitable given the fact that we became part of WTO. We opened up our economy much more aggressively than other countries. And therefore, we have been something which have been very much linked to the global market. And that brought in a different kind of a change in agriculture. In a sense, it gave the farmers in all the three places initially a good boost, good amount of increase in incomes, and also the kind of entrepreneurship that their communities are known for. But where it basically went in too far is also because it brought in the vulnerabilities. And that vulnerabilities came in the form of credit market, debts, in terms of price fluctuations, in terms of vulnerabilities that are brought in, which is naturally related to agricultural markets abroad or also in the domestic market, and which is what has led to a situation where the agriculture sector now has become much more dependent on government support. Current protest by the farmers has to be seen not just as a localized protest by farmers in Punjab and Haryana, Sikh farmers, or for example, farmers in the northeastern part of the country, but has to be seen as part of a global pattern, or at least the pattern which has been seen in the Indian context for the last 30 to 40 years, where the penetration of the market has left the farmers at the mercy of the market, and at the mercy of the market without any protection. And given the fact that nowhere in the world farmers have been left unprotected and has been left completely open as far as the markets is concerned, whether it is Europe, whether it is Canada, whether it is America, whether it is any other country, you name it, even the poorest countries, have at least some level of protection that is available to the farmers. The richer the country, the more the protection that is available to them. In India, it has been the other way around, where the level of support or level of protection has gone down over a period of time. That is something which is there. And that, I think, is something that needs to be taken into account. So current protests in that sense are a part of, I see them as part of a protest which has been going on for quite some time. I mean, in 2017 in Madhya Pradesh, 7 farmers were killed in police firing because the farmers were protesting. Tamil Nadu farmers were protesting in Delhi for about 100 days. They were doing all sorts of things, but government didn't listen to them. Maharashtra, what we call as the long march. Farmers marched for long, 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers, and thousands of farmers to get attention from the government of the precarious situation that they have been in. In fact, in the last 6 to 7 years, if you look at the official data, which is the data that is coming from the government statistics, the number of farmer protests has increased by 6 to 7 times. We don't have data prior to that, but at least now we have data. And therefore, I think what we now seeing is was bound to happen at some point of time that the farmer protest will reach the boundaries of the agricultural most prosperous state, which is where Punjab, Haryana, and Western UP come together. The problem is where I go to the second part of it. And the second part is also with the changing nature of agriculture led to what we call as a fragmentation of the agricultural solidarity or the farmer solidarity. And I think it is where I think this point needs to be spoken to, needs to be brought in and highlighted, is the way today agricultural politics goes on, which is, I think, is important to highlight. Today, the farmers in Punjab, Haryana, and other places are protesting against the dilution or the withdrawal of what we call as the Agriculture Produce Marketing Committee, which is the Mandi system, which is a government-regulated Mandi system, which has been going on for quite some time, at least for the last 50 to 60 years. This government has now withdrawn all of these. And this has been done in one stroke without any consultation with the farmers or from industries or by traders body or even in the parliament. In fact, the parliamentarians, when they wanted to have a discussion, wanted to have a discussion on the bill, they were suspended from the parliament. Because this was done at the peak of the COVID crisis when there was absolutely no necessity as to why something drastic like this had to be done and cannot be done after 1 year or after 2 years or after 10 years, or maybe after some 10 months, I mean, after having some discussion with the farmers, which is what the government is now proposing. But at least when it was being passed, the government was simply, and this is well known, I mean, this government doesn't have any respect for this kind of negotiations, this kind of discussions, and it does believe in doing things by surprise, whether it is demonetization, which was announced with a notice of 4 hours, whether it was the GST, whether it was the lockdown that was announced with a notice of 4 hours. So this government actually believes in this element of surprise. So nobody was surprised when the government finally decided one day in the middle of the lockdown on 15th of May that they are going to introduce a bill which will basically take away the regulatory power of the mandis and create a parallel dual structure where the private sector will have all the liberties of selling and buying and doing whatever it wants without any regulation from the government. Obviously, there is a larger political economy structure. I mean, a question related to that as to why was this done at this point of time, and there are ample evidence to suggest that this was done at the behest of certain corporate entities who wanted to enter the agricultural market, the retail market, and take over the retail market. And there is a big fight that is going on, and I'm not going to get into that dimension of it. But there is certainly an issue related to that part of the story. So it came in. I mean, this was something which was the protest which was there. The farmers very quickly realized that this is something which is going to be a direct attack on the Mandi system, which has been the backbone of agricultural procurement and sale and purchase of agricultural commodities. This is where the protest basically started. And this is where the Shiromani Akali Dal, which was part of the government, which is part of the NDA, and that's the irony of it, that the minister in charge of food processing was Narsimha Patel, who was the in charge of, which is the logic which the government has given, that the moment we are allowing the private sector, then more food processing will happen and more market penetration will happen. But she was not consulted. She initially tried to defend, including the Shiromani Akali Dal, which tried to defend the government's move. But finally, when the pressure went too far, then they resigned and moved out of the government. But this is something which has happened. But it is also something which is where the entire movement has now got restricted only to Punjab, Haryana, and other places. And the blame for that has to go to the farmers in Punjab, Haryana, and other parts of it. Because 15 years back, a similar move was done in a state in Bihar, where the entire APMC was abolished in one go. Not a murmur, not a protest which was there. Simply because every farmer agitation is basically looking at their own self-interest. The Marathas are more interested in the sugar prices, the Baramati region area of it, or the cotton production. Those who are there in Gujarat, the Patels, were only interested in making sure that the milk prices did not fall down. And they were assured of what is happening to milk production. Their product was bought over by the government, by the cooperatives. The Punjab farmers were only interested in what is happening to rice and wheat, because this was something which was basically being procured by the Food Corporation of India. And as long as that was something which was going on through the Food Corporation of India mandis, they were happy with that. They were not bothered about it, what is happening to other crops, what is happening to maize, what is happening to edible oil, what is happening to pulses. And the country food security basically was going from a different direction. So we became the largest importer of edible oil. We became the largest importer of pulses. Soybean prices crashed in Madhya Pradesh and farmers committed suicide. Farmers were being lathi charged, farmers were being fired upon. Nobody was being bothered. There was not even a murmur of protest in Punjab and Haryana, which was where the agricultural politics actually was the dominant part of it. Precisely the reason why that today when the attack is happening there, some people in Bihar wrongly, or at least right in their own ways, are saying, then why should we stand up? Why should we talk about something which doesn't exist in my state, which is something which is nobody is bothered about? Now, this is where the fragmentation has happened on the lines of regional identities, on the lines of crops, which are again a crop specific. So a chili farmer is not bothered about what is happening to a rice and wheat farmer. A cotton farmer is not bothered about what is happening to rice and wheat farmer. And the milk farmer is not bothered about it. This was not the case in the early part of the independence and also the pre-independence period, when the farmer movement was a much more generic movement, which basically talked about the interest of agriculture, not a particular set of crops or a particular set of commodity or a particular community or particular identity as being the beneficiary of that. That is what is now currently missing. And it is something which is where I need to point out that this interest, which is the farmer interests are concerned, is an interest which is not just the crop specific and the regional segmentation, identity levels of fragmentation that we're talking about. It's also the issue of agricultural laborers versus the cultivators. Today, there are no large landlords in India. And so this fight, this whole issue of land reforms, nobody's talking about. And there is no discussion about land, question of land distribution. But still in Punjab and other parts of the country, Western UP or Haryana or Rajasthan, there is a large part of the workforce, which is Punjabi workforce, a Sikh workforce, which comes from predominantly from Dalit communities or from deprived communities. They were the backbone of the agricultural system. They were the laborers. But when the agricultural system was doing very well, it was something which was moving forward. It was something which was giving good returns. The same mechanization was displacing labor requirement, and the agricultural laborer was basically demanding higher wages. They were quickly replaced with laborers from Bihar and Odisha. So you had a large bunch of Bihar and Odisha workers who would come and supply, simply replace local laborers, even though the local laborers were willing to work, simply because the Bihar and Odisha workers were docile, did not have the voice to raise against the dominant cultivators, and were basically dispensable, in the sense they were there in the agricultural season, but after that they will go, and therefore there was no responsibility that was there. It broke the link between the various communities within the agricultural system, which was very much important in terms of building a movement for agriculture, not only for a cultivated or for a particular crop specific person or for a particular system. I think this is something which is what has happened, and this has happened in a number of places, number of states. This has happened, but this disjunction between the various components of the agricultural production system itself, where the identities have again been broken, even though they belong to the same place, where class issues have become dominant over other issues, again needs to be thought of as to what is happening. The final issue, which is where I think is coming up, is that it is precisely this fragmentation. It is precisely this identity-led issue. It is precisely this issue that has given the handle to this current government of using the identity of the farmers to vilify them, to delegitimize their movement, to crush the movement, and to basically treat it as a movement which has the genesis in, which is what normally what they call it as an anti-national movement. This was an attempt which was done very specifically to to paint the entire movement as a Khalistani movement, being funded by the Sikhs outside. It was basically projected as a movement for secessionism. It was projected as a movement of Sikh versus the rest of the country. And it basically was, the whole narrative was being created where this was not seen as an agricultural protest, not seen as a farmers movement, not seen as a movement for agriculture related issues, but being identified by a certain sector of it. Thankfully, the Western UP farmers, the Jats, the Rakesh Tikait and others joined in, and that's where it partly neutralized the kind of an argument that this was a movement which is only being led by the farmers in Punjab and only for the Sikhs, which has been funded by they arrested Disha Ravi, which was a young 22-year-old climate activist. FIR was filed against Greta Thunberg, against Rihanna, and all sorts of things were done to show that this is an international conspiracy. Toolkits and other things were being used. She was arrested, kept in jail for 10 days to basically portray that this movement has nothing to do with agriculture. And I think this is where the Punjab farmers have been very smart and have been actually been very successful in pointing out that this is a movement which is all about farmers. But remember, it is also about farmers, but it is also about democracy. You do not expect other people to join in your movement if the other people, you are not joining the other movement of the other people. So this movement about agriculture is as much important as about protecting the democracy, which is a part of the minority has been fighting for last many years. Or for example, the CA movement that happened, or the NRC movement happened, or anything else that was happening. The movement is nothing which is today the line between corporatization, globalization, democracy, religious freedom, all of these are linked. One cannot simply draw a line and say that this is where the line is drawn, and this is purely an economic movement for the betterment of agriculture, for the farmers in Punjab alone. That is something which is not likely to work, and it is something which is allowing the state to use those divisions, use those segregations, use those sectarian agenda to basically delegitimize these movements. It did start with that agenda, and thankfully it has been somehow it has survived. The movement is still continuing, the movement is still going on, and the UP farmers have joined in the big way. And it has been very difficult for the government to isolate those farmers and to break the way. Today, there is an attempt to bring that movement together. Today, there is an attempt to take it beyond the issue which is related to Sikh or the Punjabi farmers, or for example, a particular section of the population, or to take it away and make it a national movement for agriculture, not for a particular section of the population. But it will take some time to bring in all those elements of it. But a movement like this can only survive if there is a broad-based support from different sections of it. A divided movement is unlikely to be it's not going to be feasible for the movement to put up a kind of a resistance against a government which seems to be very authoritarian, seems to be really hell-bent on suppressing the movements by, remember, this is a movement which is now in the 5th month. The Prime Minister has not even spoken once to the agitating farmers. There has never been an offer of negotiation with the Prime Minister, even though the protesting farmers have been talking about it, that at least once meet us, at least try and negotiate at any level. The Prime Minister has refused to even acknowledge it. The government is busy doing campaigning the ruling party is busy doing campaigning in Bengal. They want to win Bengal, and Bengal is a bigger prize, and therefore Punjab is dispensable. They are not bothered about whether they're losing Punjab or not. In any case, this was not a battle to be won. But this is where one is pitted, Bengal is being pitted against Punjab. Where every state's movement is being looked at in terms of the value it offers, or the number it offers in terms of parliamentary majority, or in terms of generally what we call as the majority in the democratic system. But this is something where a larger movement has to be brought in, where all other struggles, whether it is by students, by other minority groups, or by women, by Dalits, by tribals, by other disadvantaged groups has to be brought together. Because the corporate sector or the private, this is today, all Punjabi farmers, if you go and talk to the testing farmers, they now understand the motive of the corporates, the motive of basically the fissures that have been created by the globalization. But this was something which was not visible to them 2 years back, 1 year back, 5 years back, or 10 years back. When the same corporate greed was displacing tribals in the mining areas, displacing people in the forest areas, or displacing people in the plains in terms of industrialization or in terms of urbanization. It failed to link and connect it to those, and today they have come to home. Today they have come to for the markets, which is your bread and butter. So that is why I think this is where I think one needs to go beyond the issue of immediate economic interest, but think of it as an onslaught which is going to be much beyond than, going to be much more stronger over a period of time. It is not going to disappear. It is not going to simply wither away simply because the movement has been for 4 or 5 months. In fact, the longer it goes, the more longer it will be for them to keep the media attention, to keep the public memory alive. And with the COVID outbreak going on, it has given another handle for the government to dislodge the movement, saying that this is the biggest crisis that the country has faced. And at this point of time, the farmer movement is something which is a completely useless exercise. It is basically creating to the COVID pandemic. Now, it is likely that the movement will go, but the issues that it has generated, the questions that it has asked, the kind of solidarity it has generated amongst the farmers in different states and among different groups in the country itself, that I think is something which is going to continue. The challenge will be to continue this. Challenge will be to link it with those movements. Challenge will be to resist the onslaught of those forces which are hell-bent on using the divisions to further their own interests in a sustained manner, because this is not a fight for this particular bill. This is not a fight for the 3 bills that have been passed in the parliament. They will come back in different forms. They will come back in different as a different laws, and they will come back with a heavier force over a period of time. I think I'll stop here, but I just wanted to highlight some of these issues as a kind of a pointer for further discussion as we go along.
Thank you very much, Himanshu, and I really appreciate keeping to time as well. So Himanshu has really laid out the farmers' movement in a broader perspective, and we hope to kind of build on that as we go through the webinar. So before I go to the next speaker, just a quick point that if you have questions, please place them in chat, and we will attend to the questions immediately after our second speaker. Our second speaker today is Dr. Kumool Abbi, who teaches in the sociology department at Punjab University, Chandigarh. She received interdisciplinary training in sociology, semiotics, and economics from JNU and from Delhi University, which allowed her to pursue early research projects related to the consequences of globalization on traditional social structures. Her other areas of research and interest are family and gender in the northwest region of India, especially focusing on the changing status of women in post-Green Revolution Punjab, issues of female feticide and the changing structure of family, contemporary connotations of honor and shame, as well as changing trends in sun preference and the impact of agrarian distress on women. Her second major area of research is historical sociology. Here she's done pioneering work, which includes the book Discourse of Zindagi Nama, a semio-anthropological critique, which is an in-depth intertextual critique of Zindagi Nama, an award-winning novel by Krishna Sobti, providing an excellent depiction of a pre-partition village in West Pakistan. Dr. Abbi has a keen engagement with popular culture and its embeddedness within the social structure. Her focus has largely been to understand the impact and meaning of transnational and national television on rural women, on Jat Sikhs, on Dalits in a globalized world. This particular project has also been extended to a field study on migration and Bhojpuri cinema, as well as emerging trends of Sikh identities in Punjabi cinema and music. So wide range of interest there. I'm really looking forward to this talk. And Dr. Abbi, her work is appearing in Sikh formations in due course, and it focuses on the protest songs of the farmers movement. So Dr. Abbi, if you could come on video.
Is it okay now?
Yes, sounds good.
Okay. Thank you, Arvind and Anita, for inviting me. The Punjab farmers' agitation has drawn an unprecedented response from the cultural and creative side. It has, to a large extent, completely shaken the rural society and given it new meaning and consciousness. Professor Himanshu has given a very good introduction, and he has talked about the whole agrarian crisis and the economic aspect of it. I would be dealing more with the cultural aspect, and I would now not go much into the economic aspect. The agitation against the farm bills emerging in the backdrop of the rural crisis in Punjab that involved issues like environmental degradation, decline in productivity, need for crop diversification to overcome the problems created by over reliance on rice wheat cultivation, the growing gap between crop yield and employment generation, problems of marketing, fragmentation of holdings, farmer suicide, and drug addiction. Since the discussion centers on reassessing the farmers' protests, I would like to discuss the issue from the narratives that have emerged from the farmers' protests, specifically Punjabi popular protest music, a new genre which would flag off issues that have changed the present and have implications for the future. The first related to the popular folk reaction of the men and women to the bills in the form of bolis, jago marches, PM Modi's Pit Siapa, basically called morning ritual, as well as the involvement of many dholak and tumbi players, that is the folk instruments. Even weddings have incorporated the slogan of the Kinsan Mazdoor Ekta, where to illustrate the groom, in one of the weddings, the groom carried the flag of the Bharatiya Kisan Union. Um, can I show some slide? Is it okay? Um, Even the boliyan sung at the weddings reflect the struggles of the agitation. Hi Jamalo, Delhi nu chaliye, let's go to Delhi. Modi has made a law. We are not going to accept the law. Even if Modi comes or his father's comes, chalo, let's go to Delhi. The boys of the Jats are going to surround Delhi. Modi try very hard, but we are not scared. Similarly, a great deal of activity has taken place at the progressive level. The popular artists associated with the movement being Jagjit Kaur Nikki from Bhavanigarh and Jaspreet Kaur from Patiala, who began their journey from dharnas at toll plazas, performed songs of Santram Udasi, Avtar Pash, Raj Kakra, and the most popular being Pash's Lehra Ban Uthe, Rise Like a Wave, and Aman Kani's Jad Takte Hakam Bola Hove, when the ruler on the throne is deaf. Similarly, artists like Reshma Chauhan from Barnala, who led her Azad Rang Manch troupe, Amlok Singh of Lok Sangharsh Manch, and theatre artist Surinder Sharma have been very active. The Punjabi popular singers have had a tremendous hold on youth and society. Right from the emergence of popular Punjabi folk music, the artists have become icons for youth. This agitation has shown that the biggest names from the Punjabi music and film industry have lent their support to the agitation. They have, in fact, been credited for having played a key role in preparing the ground for the farmers' protest to Delhi much before it took place. Writers and singers penned, sang, and released most of these videos in September and October. The songs shared on YouTube, WhatsApp, and other media platforms gave the audiences a wide reach. This also connects to their active participation at dharna sites and at the Delhi borders, the epicenter of the protest. The most prominent among them being Kanwar Garewal. Others among them also include Amy Virk, Ranjit Bawa, Sidhu Musewala, Resham Singh Anmol, Himmat Sandhu, Jas Bajwa, Jazzy B, and Diljit Dosanjh. Um, the artists felt that they owed this to their agrarian background, which gave them enough empathy and commitment to stand and shoulder to shoulder with the farmers in their struggle for existence and survival. Music becomes an important catalyst and tool in getting the voices of dissent heard. As one popular artist, Galavarat, says, "We are sons of farmers and then we are artists. We are standing with them. People accuse us of being from a party, but we have come voluntarily because it is our right." The music alludes to the cultural crisis of identity faced by the agrarian Jatsi community in terms of ideal non farm employment, changing interests of the rural elite, restricted opportunities to migrate abroad, changing demographic profile, and a growing reality of losing dominance specifically due to the Punjab's complex linkages between the village and the transnational spaces. All factors pointing to, as Himanshu has also talked about, emergence of new social groups that seek a new identity as they look up to the rural agrarian as the way of the future and a possible emergence of a Kisan Biradari. What strikes most in the songs and the music videos is of the Jat farmer as an agitationist. In a dramatic change, most of the songs are staged in a sequence of dharnas, rallies, and agitational politics. The Jat emerges in the agitational setting as an agriculturist agitating peacefully on the streets, sitting on dharna, breaking barricades, and reclaiming himself as a Kisan. This reclaiming has to do with agrarian life world, living on the field and seeking sustenance from it. In contrast, the opulence and consumerist aspect of the Jat dominance, gun culture, donalis, that is double barrel guns, toxic masculine stereotypes, which emerged in post Green Revolution rural Punjab, are eclipsed. While attempting to maintain the mythic Jat invincibility, the Jats transcend from a dominant caste to a class of farmers and categorize themselves as Kisan. One of the most important difference in the role reversal is the struggle which is of a modern farmer, yet the values which are exalted and referred to are traditional. The Kisan becomes symbolically represented with the bullock cart, oxen, and kahi, that is sickle, which are very significant. Here, the roots are eternal, and the Jat reiterates his link to them through continuous back and forth movement between different spaces, as well as symbolic allegory with the mother. The land is like a mother to the Jats. These songs break certain illusions about Jat assertion, who, with stark realism, reassess their own position with themselves and in relation to the state. This struggle, unlike other movements, is not about bringing about change, but to maintain status quo. Connected with this is the issue of fear of loss of land and the exploitative relationship between big corporates and the farmers, which accounted for the participative appeal of the movement as one felt a resonance for the farmers who are seen as idyllic, simple, trusting, benign, providers of food, nurturing, fighting against the greedy and wily corporates who are visualized as lacking idealism, their priority being commercialization and profiteering. Here, the illusion to being the Andata is very significant, that is, Andata is the food giver. These apprehensions are flagged off in many of the songs. For example, in Kisan Khab Khosa by Hari Bhatti, don't kill the farmer by implementing new laws. Why not make him stand at the intersection and kill him once and for all? Jas Bajwa's popular song Jatta Tagda Ho Ja, Jatta Jat Become Strong too is apprehensive of such a transition. Bills have been passed by the center. Now they want to quieten the issue. First, they will eliminate the contractors, eliminate the role of the Arathiyas. They will uproot the jets from the roots. The government at the center have always been treacherous to the Jats. The government at the center have always deceived the zamindars. They want to wrest our lands. They want to bring private sector in agriculture. They want to make us laborers in our own land. Connected with this were a number of songs which highlighted the plight of the farmers. While some songs released early became viral once again, many new were released in September, October, and November, giving a realistic assessment of the farmer's position. Kisani by Rangla Sardar is very important, and it begins with what to talk of Ambani and Andani. Ambani and Adani are the two important businessmen who are supposed to be having vested interests in the Punjab agriculture, who will offer their sacrifice. The youth has been mortgaged by intoxicants. We simpletons have been cheated. Your farming is in danger. Jatta, your Kisani is in full danger. Today the Kisan cries, tomorrow the whole world would cry. We have been swindled. Similarly, has been the popular Babuman songs Mandiyan with Jat, Jats in the Mandi, and Jat de June Buri, Terrible Life of the Jat. In fact, they've been a deluge of Jat de June Buri songs. The latest Jat de June Buri song was by Joban Motewala and Harman Sidhu. It talks about my love just scratch your brains. Your harvest is being swallowed by the businessmen. We fill our bullock carts with grains, come back empty-handed. We are just trying to pass time. People have set up factories. People have constructed houses like palaces. We are facing horrible days due to our bad fate. All the potatoes of the Jats lie scattered on the roads. They are not even worth a few kauris or pennies. They will sell them, make them making Lay's chips, that is potato chips. They drive an Audi. They take away from the mandi at throwaway prices. Maize becomes popcorn when 4 kernel are sold for 20. It's the government who have looted and swallowed everything. Why does only the judge suffer a beating? It was a sin to sell milk, but now it is a compulsion. Sold a potful cheaply, but the price on the packet is charged full. Did I tell you yesterday? I threw away the bales of my damp cotton. Corporate houses will take over. They will finish my work in the mandis. They will now plow our farms. May God protect us. Banks have mortgaged our lands and every corner of our fields. The Aratiyas, that is the middlemen, will be hard pressed. Those who are known as Andatas now died starving. Those bills have been passed are only to fill the stomachs of the government. Now let us all get together so that no one again says Jat di Junburi. The other most significant implication relates to the issue of politics and politicians. Himanshu has also talked about it, which will have a special significance for the future. A very important aspect of the agitation has been the consistent ridiculing of politicians who have not been allowed to control the agitation and even address the gatherings. Sippy Gill's Ashik Mittide, Lovers of the Land, puts this in context. Politics is of the thieves. The simple people have to consider jail as their makkah. The fire will be slowly stoked. Even our blood would be picked by the ambers. What congressmen or akalis? They will all say that the treasury is empty. The garden becomes dry when the caretaker is corrupt. We have forgotten about fragrance as flowers will not bloom in a wasteland. That is called a maruthal. Fix Hoya match by the Tarsem Jassar looks at the ridiculousness of it all. It is a fixed match. They win alternatively. The true ones are hanged while the lion becomes stable. They are fighting just to show off. The same people are at the backstage. It is a game of money. They blame others. Lying leaders never suffer any damage. When their disciples die, never a leader has stood up. The thieves stay put, souls are on sale, so are people's consciousness. Babuwan's Fasla de Mul too disparages these politicians, sucking the blood of hard-working people with big hearts. How comfortably they sit on their chairs, only the name changes. Then Kanwar Garewal's Pecha, which is almost an iconic song, too exposes these politicians. They evade issues during elections. These hypocritical leaders, so many divisions are there, and flags of so many parties. After taking the votes, face the sticks of simple Jats. All need to be beaten up. Let's all get together and go to Delhi. Farmer versus Kisan by Deep Godbhai too critiques the politicians. Jawans come locked in wooden caskets. Farmers fight rudderless on the streets for their rights. Look at the pitiable condition of Bharat Mata. Jat has to take a stand for selling his harvest. Son fights on the border with China for Delhi, while the father fights with Delhi for his lands. Now it is a question of our survival. Those who took benefit from us have ditched us. Leaders are only interested in politics, while the unhappy farmer gets roasted in the sun. The response of the political parties to the agitation also reflect the anxieties of losing their vote. bank. This is specifically so for the Akali Dal and the JJP in Haryana, while the Akali Dal had to withdraw support to the BJP government. Similarly, Congress party led by Captain Amrinder Singh and also led tractor marches all in Punjab, vociferously supporting the farmers' protests, rejected the farm bills in special assembly session and passed alternative legislation. I'll show you some more slide. These are all the politicians going for tractor marches. The Christ has been very central to the Akali Dal, which is envisaged as the political voice of the Sikh Panth, and it can in no way um, alienate its core constituency, which is the Jat Sikh peasantry. Therefore, Sukhbir Badal, who is the leader of the Akali Dal's quote, every Akali is a farmer and every farmer is an Akali at heart, is pregnant with many speculations. As it has been pointed out by Observer of Punjab Affairs, nobody is a leader in these protests. Everyone has minimized themselves, and the farmer has taken center stage in an emerging political movement without politicians. So, the issues which concern us is whether those who are prominent in the agitation, do they envisage a political role for themselves as members of three political parties, that is Akali Dal, Congress, and Aam Admi Party, or would they be in a possibility of new alignments with the farmers movement transforming into a political outfit, and how successful it would be, and what would be the configuration between the Jat Sikhs, the Punjabi Hindus, the Dalits, and the radicalized and restless youth. Similarly, the role of the Samyukt Kisan Morcha in the campaigning against the government and the center. And another very interesting emerging political phenomena relates to political and emotional born hemi between Punjab and Haryana. During the farmers' agitation, which despite many political parties' attempts to raise the Satyul Yamuna link along issue and other bogies, was not successful in breaking this pact. At the moment, Punjab has embraced Haryana as a Chota Veer, that is a younger brother. Then we move on. A very important sequence of the protest songs is a lapse in historical and cultural memory. While the historical memory links to the times of Baba Banda Singh Bahadur, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, Hari Singh Nalwa, Baghel Singh, Bhai Ganaya, who are remembered for mythic identification, who are remembered for mythic identification, the agrarian struggle is reflected through Kartar Singh Sharaba, Udham Singh, Bhagat Singh, and his uncle Ajit Singh, who are specifically focused on because of their association with agrarian struggles in the form of the historical Pagri Sambhal Jatta movement. The terms of contemporary issues like partition, Operation Blue Star, the Delhi Riots, Dharmyud Morcha, the Satluj Yamuna link issue, fleeting reference to Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwala do appear in flashbacks and in moments of reflection. Um, as Jaskaran Varach Dhamki states, Sada chalda hai churasi wala vair nahi. Our enmity goes back to 1984. We have not forgotten Diliye, the ties you put around our necks. Now, I would like to once again explain that Delhi is usually referred to, Delhi is the capital and is a center. It is usually referred in a very, pejorative and a very ridiculing way as Dilliye. It is addressed as Dilliye more like a feminine way, but it is addressed as Dilliye in all the songs. It is this anxious, contentious past which plays a role in the complex relationship between Delhi and the largely Jat peasantry, for whom this struggle entails a claim and assertion of their rights, that is haq, which might at times invoke a threat of violence. Lahu Punjab Da by Gippy Garewal creates this eclectic mix of the past and present. We tear through the stones, the Babas who went to Delhi offered his hair, that is Guru Tegh Bahadur. We are the new generation inheritors of his tradition. The cat begins to tremble when the lions rose. I am the thick blood of the Punjab. The sound resounded from Sambhu to Delhi. Fords are going to make the ambassadors scream. Your Ford means the tractors. Your bill bull Diliye, I will tear them. The stable ones are holding out a challenge. On our heads, you established your government. In return, you always played politics with us. I just dust my shoes on the face of the politics. We will not turn back, will not withdraw and be afraid. Every young man will fight for the Kisan. Kavan Garewal and Harf Chima's popular song Pecha carries this forward. The black policies of Delhi are before you. The time has come to stand up against the system. They want to wrest your fields which you have cultivated. Pull up, Jat, pull up your preparations. You are in for a confrontation. The illusion is to the kite flying with the center. So the very popular song is Jatta Khich Tayari, Pecha Pegya, Center Nal. um, the songs pictorially present in black and white montages scenes of rallies, dharnas, protest sites where the farmers protest peacefully. Here there also comes a veiled threat. Let the sickle remain on the judge's shoulders. If they pick up a donali, that is double barrel gun, it will send a volley of bullets. Um, Dhamki wa Jaskar and Riyar too echoes a similar sentiment. Consider it a warning or a threat. Now it will be a do or die battle. Instead of agriculture instruments, these hands will carry weapons. Cover Garibal's elan in the background of gunfire sums up the mixed hue of emotions. Somewhere you will see a kanda, somewhere a kirpan. Delhi, this gathering will trouble you. It will prove more damaging to you than beneficial. Faslan de faisle kisan karega. The decision of the farmers would be taken by the Kisan. While Harbhajan Man's Haq reflects the hope, expectations, and exuberance of the farmers as they reach the Delhi borders. Ranjit Bawa's Punjab Bolda conveys the presence in Delhi in an ironical way. They used to take Tata Sumos to the airport, so they have now come on trolleys. See, they have now come on trolleys. Those who were called Urta Punjab, they have now put their underwear, that is kacheras, to dry in Delhi. Um, Corollary to this is the counter narrative of the youth, who have a stereotype image of wasters, drug addicts, and drunkards. Their active participation in the movement, Himanshu has also talked about, counters this dominant perception. Kaur Garewal and Harsh Chima celebrate Punjabi Javani, that is Punjabi youth. There was a wave, and every young man got up. There is a storm in every village, and the war has begun. Those who call themselves addicts, now these persons are called Sahab. Zindagi Zindabad ni Jawani hai. Let's celebrate the youth. The whole Punjab is proud of you. Kisan anthem too elucidates this. We have put barricades behind the Swarads. Jats have come from Punjab. Even if the media is sold out, the young men are dominating the BBC. It is this context which led to a number of songs which countered the terrorist narrative and the popular actress Kangana Ranaut. Kanwar Garewal and Harf Chima in Jawani Zindabad say, someone says separatists, someone says terrorists. Everyone is troubled by Nanak's dream. Sardara by Aman Garewal puts it more bluntly. If we ask for our rights, we are called rebels. If we ask something, we are terrorists. Atwadi Kisan by Rajveer Sidhu and Le Son Kangana by Harsimran Jeet Sidhu directly confront Kangana Ranaut. You call Jats Atwadi Kangana, the whole world calls them Andata. Wheat is grown from our fields. That is why your family can enjoy a hearty meal. The participation of women in the farmers' agitation, I'll just discuss it briefly, has added a unique dimension to the agitation. Again, the time has given a special cover to it. The statistics have shown that women have been actively participating in the agitation and have become the symbolic face of the protest. The agitation has once again of the um, brought out the invisibility of the female agricultural force who have been relegated to the background by the Green Revolution, which made agriculture a completely male domain, documented by many studies. However, what has not been documented is that women have borne the burden of the collapse of the agrarian dream. It is the women who had to pay the price as the prosperous world of their men collapsed before them. It was for these women to pick up the shreds, to battle for survival, and to save their future, the future of their children. It is this intensity which has given them a leading role in the agitation. The songs are full of snapshots of women, agitationists, while in the beginning this presence was largely symbolic. It came on its own on Women's Day with the popular redonation of Ma Mera Rang De Basanti Chola, which was related to the freedom agitation related to Shahid Bhagat Singh, to Mai Rang De Basanti Chunia, color my dupattas as Basanti, that is saffron. Then another of Kaur Garewal's song Parvaz celebrated the emergence of a sense of self of the women in the protest. Then, of course, we have the initial participation of the movement, which is more symbolic and silent with the women, like in songs like Surje Wala and Jag Kisana, that is Wake Up Kisan, by Labh Hira, where the women silently watches the strained relationship between her husband and her father-in-law solace the support of the son, who is cynical. So she somehow manages to make the son agree, and he finally joins the movement. However, as the movement has progressed, the tones and tenor of the songs involving women also changes. Kisan Mahatma is a song based on a conversation between a husband and wife in the village courtyard. She is helping him tie the turban and begins to read the newspaper, commenting on the current situation, and eventually hands over to him the Kisan Union flag as he prepares to leave for Delhi. It is 3 months and you have been at it day and night. Even now, the engines are full of grains. You have surrounded all our Delhi borders. The Jats will not return back to the village empty handed. Ties, ties, ties. Jata, this has created a movement. Will they put an end to the profession of Kisani? I don't think Modi will agree. What does the chada? Now, this is a very interesting word which is used in Punjabi language. There he addresses chada as a single man. How a family is run. We will not let go the mandis. Why should such a law be allowed? The Jat would be scattered economically. Now, a new assertion and visibility of women taking an active part in the agriculture process is also expressed in songs like Delhi to Punjab and Allah Sheri. Don't worry about the wheat, I will water the fields, beginning with the spray. All your duties, I will fulfill them. Remember Bhagat Singh and Udham Singh and Saraba as well. Keep on Baba Nanak always in your mind. The elderly women protesters come into significance with the comments of the Chief Justice of India, who questioned as to why are women and elders being kept in the protests and wanted them to be persuaded to return. The second was Diljit Dosanjh's rebuttal of Kangana Ranaut's tweet of an old Punjabi woman describing her as the Shaheen Bagwali Dadi who was available in 100 rupees. It is this backlash which also got reflected in many popular songs, and how the issue of women came up, where he talked about the fact that how the Punjabi society talks about women and how women have a very assertive and strong presence in Punjabi society. So, as far as the gender issue is concerned, it is requires a webinar on its own. So, I will just stop here and we can discuss with the we can discuss in the discussion. The another issue which has implications for the future in terms of the farmers' protests, in terms of the parallel universe they are played out, is the social media, the youth technology and community networking. And this became very important as the farmers had to give their own narrative to counter the official media or Godi media or Labdo media as it is called. And then they were holding the reins of the movement and the narrative. They have also started their own IT cell to disseminate information, as well as the campaigns, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Snapchat handles, and the newspaper Trolley Times. The social media has become an important tool for social outreach. And then Himanshu has also talked about the tweets of Rihanna, Greta Thunberg, Meena Harris, among others, and even Diljit Dosanjh wrote a song on Rihanna. So the involvement of social media embraces the people associated with agriculture in a much wider umbrella. It included those involved in pluri-activity, urban migrants, and the Punjabi diaspora, who were connected to lands through economy, culture, roots, and heritage, thus creating a participatory online imagined community of farmers, which would have consequences politically and have a lot of implications in the future. Now, this also requires a detailed study. Lastly, the most significant aspect of the songs commemorating the struggle in Delhi relate to the new dimension of Sikhi in practice. As Jas Bajwa's song Delhi Dekh Diliye states, see the combination of the youth with the Babas, defining the spirit of the farming protest. The Sikh concept of langar and seva become the symbolic rallying point of the movement. Particularly significant was the peaceful and non-violent spirit of the movement, reflecting the images of the agitationists making the policemen share their langar. Now, these are the very important photographs, and this was the iconic photograph. And here of the farmer and the Muslims participating in the langar. Now, the process of community participation by preparing and distribution of langar, sharing it with everyone, as well as cleaning and washing up by the men and women themselves, has played a very significant role in universalizing distinctive elements of Sikhism, particularly their role in knitting together and consolidating the movement. Here, the humanitarian role aid provided by the NGO Khalsa Aid in arranging accommodation, warm clothes, and medicine has also been showcased. Crucially significant is the Sikh concept of martyrdom, the motivation to sacrifice themselves for a cause. Now, this is very important here, and these are the farmers who have died, and for a cause. So it says, as one song says, Delhi karti Punjab vargi. Delhi has become like Punjab, Langars of Baba Nanak are going on everywhere. Jats have made Delhi like Punjab. So in a sum up, I would say that I'll continue with Himanshu on this point. That 26th January was a major turning point, and it led to the emergence of Rakesh Tikait and shift of the movement from Singhu border to the Ghazipur borders, and has brought about a change and transformed the movement from a more Sikh or Punjab centric one to a more broad-based one, and it has stimulated the agitation has stimulated many pressure groups. An important pressure group has emerged, which has, the farmers is an important pressure group which has emerged and identified as a tie-up between government and the corporates. Movement is in a direction to forage solidarity and gain more political strength. The Samyukt Kisan Morcha is moving towards an anti-state movement with focus on rising prices, petrol and diesel, cooking gas, then issues like public sector to corporates, that is, they call them Punjiwadis, sectarian politics, income disparities, corporate monopolies, role of women in agriculture, declining nutritional standards, all these issues, and involving diverse groups like trade unions, laborers, students, youth, etc. Now, it could take the shape of a nationwide revolution against the established regime, or maybe fizzle out also. Whether there would be a generation again, and certain issues related to Punjab relate to whether there would be a generational shift in leadership of the Samvit Kisan Morcha. How would the radicalized and energized youth fit in these new emerging scenario, and how do they visualize a new political role? Then, how would there be a continuity between the leftist roots of the movement? Then how long would the interests of the large and small farmers remain the same? Similarly, what are the interests between continuity of interest between Dalits and Jatsiks, and how would because this, though they agree that at this moment it's a movement of the exploitation of land, but in the long term, how long would the interests remain the same, and or whether these are all joined together or moments of liminality? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kumool. If you could just stop sharing screen, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll just do that.
That was a wonderful paper. I really appreciate that, and the especially the synergies between the first and paper and yours. So we've got approximately 12 to 13 minutes for discussion. We've managed to save some time, so I've asked Himanshu to get ahead and maybe look at a couple of questions that are relevant to him. And Kumool, there are one or two questions directed to you as well. As soon as you stop sharing, I can maybe even help you read them off. But
okay, no, yes.
Himanshu, have you seen any questions relevant to you?
Yeah, let me quickly answer the ones which I think I can. I mean, the first one is that I have a Gujarati friend who says there is no problem with farmers in Gujarat. I mean, that's something which is simply not correct. And I think Anneeth has already raised that she will be answering the question, but but I don't think that's something which is entirely correct. And I don't want to get into a discussion with that, but at least my own understanding, and there are a number of papers, a number of people who know that there is a problem which is, the nature of problem may be different in Punjab compared to the Gujarat, or in Tamil Nadu or in Maharashtra and other places. That is something which is there, but there is a problem which is there. And agriculture as a whole has been in crisis for quite some time. I think really the question that I wanted to answer was the question on Bengal versus Punjab. It is not about Bengal versus Punjab, but I was making a more generic point that in today's context, if you want to build solidarities on issues on agriculture, then it has to be an issue on issues which are pan-India, or at least bring in more groups rather than only talking about one section of the population. So it's not about Bengal versus Punjab. Obviously, the government will try and divide. Political parties will take advantage of the sectarianism. But for the farmers have been very smart, and they have been able to make it into a pan-India movement in a very, very short period of time. That, I think, is the way to go ahead and make it a more universal kind of a movement, rather than keep it only focused on certain issues, the bill that have been passed. That, I think, is something which is happening, and it is going to take some time because the fragmentation and the fissures have been building up for quite a long period of time, and therefore it will take some time before everybody comes on board. And there will be some give and take that has to be understood by various groups. Remember, even in the Punjab groups, there are more than 76 groups which are there, farmer unions who are on the borders of Delhi in 3 different places. But they all have come together. There has been some of them were adversaries, but now they're all together. So I think that's a process which will go on for some period of time. The other question which I wanted to answer was to, the unity between farmers and laborers. That's something which is very, very crucial. It's not something what we are seeing which is being reflected between the agricultural laborers and the farmers, but also what we're seeing is between Dalits, Jats, the Jat Hindus, the Jat Sikhs, and various communities which never had that kind of a history of cooperation in that sense, coming together and talk about issues which are very similar in nature and raising issues which are not just self-centric but also more generic issues. For example, the corporatization of agriculture, issues related to land, issues related to the changes in agriculture that is happening. I mean, for example, the whole issue of women in agriculture is again something which is, we are at least talking about it. At some point of time, we will stop talking about all those issues. One more question which I wanted to answer, and then I think most of the other questions were for Kumool, so I won't be getting into it. But I just wanted to say, point out that the allies are important, and these allies are not just going to be allies in terms of other farmer groups and other farmer unions, but also allies in terms of youth, the youth movement, or for example, because remember, this is the fight not about the 3 laws. If you're trying to link it with a larger movement of globalization, larger movement of corporate interest, larger movement of attack on democracy, because you see, the whole idea of branding the whole movement as Khalistanis, or the fact that this is being supported by the foreign elements, is not just a question which is an attack only for this group. This has happened over a period of time where people who have been protesting against the government have been, over a period of time been vilified as anti-nationals. Sedition charges have been filed in Tamil Nadu, in Maharashtra, in JNU, in other places. And I think if you don't resist these ones, then you start falling into the same trap over a period of time. So I think building these larger solidarities is important for any struggle to survive in the long run, whether it is NRC, CAA, or it is against the labor laws, or against all other issues that we are talking about. And I think this is what we are seeing for the first time, where the farmer movement, and at least led by the Punjab farmer unions, is now bridging these and the building solidarities among other groups. And I think that's something which is very, very interesting, and a new way of new movement that we are seeing after a long period of time. I just would like to stop here and then let you answer.
Thank you very much, Himanshu. And Kumool, are you able to look at these questions?
There is one question, I think, yes. I can see only one question. Well, I'm not very much an expert on the diaspora relationship between the diaspora and the community, but I would like to say that there are 2 perceptions about what the diaspora has a different image, and there is a different image in the in Punjab. So this is because of that certain issues or conflicts emerge, particularly when you're talking about this cancellation of protests, cancellation of lectures, and all these issues. So this could be possible that you see, when we are looking at the farmers movement, there are many complex issues which have emerged. One which, as you have talked about, I'll just give a hint of it, is related to the role of the youth, particularly the youth, and the kind of crisis that has emerged as a result of their being very involved with the movement, and a certain kind of radicalization, which comes a little bit of a contrast with the Kisan Morcha, which has more a leftist kind of an orientation. So always there would be some kind of a conflict of this kind. So this is what I think, that this is something which should always remain, because as we have discussed that, a lot of people have come together in the Samyukt Kisan Morcha. So there will always be different strands, and some people would prefer some and others would, so that is what I feel about it.
There's at least another couple of questions. Would you like me to read them to you?
You can, because and I've got it.
Okay. There's one by Baljit Kaur, and another one by Shaimal Kotaria.
Okay, there's one by Anshu Malhotra.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as far as the Jat Sikhs and Dalits are concerned, I don't think, yes, to some extent, Dalits have stood by the Jat Sikhs, and Jat Sikhs have acknowledged and appreciated it. And the Dalits also feel that the continuation of the mandis, and they get a lot of support from the mandis. Then they get a support from the Jat Sikh farmers and Jat Sikh landlords. And secondly, the things like public distribution system, Manrega, and other issues which concern the Dalits also indirectly reflect in the in the rejection of the bills. These issues are there, but in the long term, I don't think that the Jat Sikh interests and Dalits interests would ever be the same. There are always many issues. It is a inherent contradiction between the two, and it's very difficult to think that they'll be same. And as far as son preference is concerned, in fact, I have done work on a UN project on reversing son preference. So, in terms of son preference, it is the Dalits who are reversing the son preference, and among the Dalits, you don't have this choice of son preference. They are educating their daughters, they are giving birth to their daughters, and their daughters are taking up jobs and emerging or rising in the social hierarchy. As compared to that, you have the Jats who are practicing female infanticide. One of the factors could be that if you have more resources, you can go out, you can go to different places and get the female child killed, which the Dalits do not have those options. But at the same time, they're also looking at the advantages of having children, having girls, having their daughters born and living a good life. So Dalits in Punjab, to a large extent, have reversed son preference. That is some part of one study which I had done, but this needs a greater amount of work to be done.
Okay. I'm seeing, I just got a message here. Himanshu, would you like to answer one more, or?
Is there some other question?
Yes, sure. If there is anything that you would like me to.
There's quite a few questions that have come in, and we've got 3 minutes exactly. So I'm going to just read one out by Baljit Kaur, and I've just had a note from somebody in the audience saying they can't see the questions. We'll try and fix that afterwards. But this question is primarily towards Kumool. Do the songs which have emerged in support of the protests carry representations of Dalits, tribals, laborers, and women of Punjab? Do the lyrics talk about their specific issues as participants in the farming process?
Unfortunately, we had I probably missed that slide. There is a participation of, there is the whole genre of Dalit singers in Punjab. So Dalit singers have shown their identification with the Jat Sikhs, with the community, but there are no songs of Dalits participation in the movement as such. What has been shown is essentially women emerging in the songs of women, voices of women have only started towards emerge towards the last 1.5 months. Women's voices are emerging, and what women are feeling about it are emerging. But yes, the Dalits voice is absent. This is mostly the Jat dominated songs, because one last thing I like to say is it is also related to economics. The economics is that who can afford to bring out these videos. These are just not videos, are just not simply a very simple without money. You need a lot of money to arrange these videos. So Jat Sikhs have a certain dominance in this. So they have kind of moved on from these songs to protest songs, and they could easily make this transition as compared to Dalits, who will have a very complex identification with this issue. So that is one of the reasons perhaps that they are not participating in these kind of songs.
Okay, thank you. Himanshu, this is one for you. We've got a couple of minutes so you could answer this. It's by Shamsher Singh. Given the discourse we are seeing emerging, questioning the relations between center and state, calls for greater reforms, for more decentralization, state autonomy, sovereignty, what possibilities do you see beyond electoral politics?
One is that the discussion about greater reforms in that sense is something which is likely to be a process which is going to be fraught with these issues. I mean, because the issues which were divided as center state issues were divided quite a long time back. And today there is a huge amount of overlap between issues which one really can say that these are within the domain of the center and domain of the center. So it is basically changing the narrative. It is also testing the limits of these federal relationships. I mean, GST, for example, is a good example of that, where it is a central legislation which takes away the power of taxation from the states. But it is something which has been over a period of time, through mutual consultation, has been able to, I mean, there has been progress on that. And we finally have something which is system. The answer to all of these issues is basically that there has to be more and more dialogue. There is absolutely no doubt that the politics has to become more federal, but it also has to be taking into account the needs as well as the aspirations of the states, and the regional identities have to be respected. In a democracy, cannot be any centralized authority which can push for reforms. And this is something which is not going to work in a democratic system like India, where there is a huge heterogeneity, in a sense, not just heterogeneity in terms of the nature of the economy, but also in terms of cultural, linguistic, and other ways where there is there. Building these consensus is going to be very important. But the nature of changes in economy requires us to move into a sector where there is a larger collaboration between states and the center. So I think it's a very open question, and this is a question which has been debated in a big way in political science, and at the state level as well as the central level. I don't think there is one single answer to this question, but it is a question which is there on the table. It is going to lead to more confrontation, but will also lead to more cooperation, as we are seeing now happening in some of the areas.
Okay, thank you very much. And with that, we are going to move to a break for 9 or 10 minutes. I want to thank our first two speakers for a wonderful and invigorating first session. We're going to carry on at 12:30, so it's just gone 12:21 now. We will be back in about 9 minutes. So please take a break and we'll get to our second session. And in the meantime, Alex will collate the questions and send them to the speakers, so you can have all of the questions to answer at your own in your own time. We'll see you in about 9 minutes.
Okay, everyone, welcome back. Just as a reminder, my name is Anneeth Hundle, and I'm co-moderating our wonderful webinar today with Professor Mandair. I will be moderating our second session, and we're going to move directly into this right now. So I'd like to start off by introducing Dr. Navyug Gill. Navyug Gill is a scholar of modern South Asia and global history. He's assistant professor in the Department of History at William Paterson University. He received a PhD from Emory University and a BA from the University of Toronto. His research explores questions of agrarian change, labor politics, caste hierarchy, post-colonial critique, and global capitalism. Currently, he's completing a book on the emergence of the peasant and the rule of capital in colonial Punjab. His academic and popular writings have appeared in venues such as the Journal of Asian Studies, Economic and Political Weekly, Al Jazeera, Law and Political Economy Project, Borderlines, and Trolley Times, the new publication that has emerged out of this recent agitation. Navyug has been really involved in commentary just as soon as these protests began, and we've been following all of his wonderful analysis. So we really welcome Navyug to the discussion today. Secondly, I want to introduce Dr. Jasdev Singh Rai. Dr. Jasdev Rai is a medical doctor by profession, specializing in larynx surgery. He's also a longtime social activist and a trained political analyst with a master's degree in political science and international studies from the University of London, LSE. Dr. Rai is the founder and director of the Sikh Human Rights Group, a non-governmental organization with a long and distinguished track record of human rights work at the UN, including contributing projects on race, ecodiversity, and cultural pluralism. Dr. Rai is a founder of the British Sikh Consultative Forum. He contributes to a regular column on lokmarg.com, and over the past 35 years has given interviews to do with Punjab and the Sikhs on mainstream British TV channels. So we are so happy to welcome him with us as well for the second portion of the webinar. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Navyug. Navyug, about 30 minutes, and then we'll transition into Dr. Rai's presentation, and then we will open it up again.
I'll be back in a bit, guys.
Okay, and just as a reminder,
wonderful.
Please mute, and Navyug, you can get going.
Great, and can you hear me, Anneeth? Yes?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, okay, excellent. So Thank you very much to Anneeth and Arvind for organizing this conversation and for inviting me to be a part of it. I also appreciate Alex for all their help in the logistics, and I'm glad to be alongside such thoughtful panelists. I do wish we could have been together in person, but I guess we have to sort of make the most of this new form of interaction, even though it's not very interactive. So this is an especially urgent moment to be reassessing the farmer and laborer struggle in India. It has been ongoing for 5 months at the Delhi border, 10 months in Punjab, and many years in the making. This struggle has captured the imagination of millions of people in India and across the world, and it has unsettled a variety of assumptions, as well as thrown up profound questions for how we understand agriculture, hierarchy, and neoliberalism. While there are many facets to this struggle, and we've heard from Dr. Himanshu and Dr. Abbi already, I'm going to focus on 3 themes. One is the Green Revolution, 2 is the politics of caste in Punjab, and 3 is global capitalism. And hopefully my remarks will be a sort of starting point to a more fruitful exchange during the discussion. So first, to the Green Revolution. In order to properly understand this protest, we need to look at the transformation of agriculture in post-colonial India. After 1947, India was a largely impoverished country, experiencing severe food shortages to the point of having to import grain. At the same time, there were waves of leftist-inspired armed uprisings across the decolonizing world, including within India. Thus, in order to prevent famine and communism, the Indian government needed to rapidly increase food production. To do so, it partnered with the US State Department, along with the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations in the 1960s. Together, they developed a set of technologies and strategies that became known as the Green Revolution. And it was designed to counter an explicitly red revolution. This entailed the introduction of hybrid high-yield seed varieties, chemical pesticides and fertilizers, and mechanization through tube wells and tractors. Now, the government chose Punjab as the site to deploy this program because it had exceptionally fertile soil and abundant groundwater, as well as self-cultivating small-holding farmers. In order to get farmers to adopt these capital-intensive technologies, the government introduced 2 key mechanisms: minimum support prices, or MSP, and government procurement markets, which are known as mandis. So this meant that the government set up mandis throughout the state and promised to buy unlimited quantities of crops at fixed prices, which is what gave farmers a modicum of stability. The result was the dramatic increase in crop output. Yields doubled and tripled year after year, so that Punjab, as 1.5% of the territory of India, produced something like 60 to 70% of the wheat and rice that fed the entire country for decades. This is how India became food self-sufficient. Now, at the same time, the Green Revolution had severely detrimental effects in terms of inequality, ecology, and caste tensions. People raised objections at the time, from civil society groups to economists to religious leaders and politicians. They made several suggestions and even demands, but they were largely ignored and even maligned by the government. It is this contentious system of MSP and mandis that continued with diminishing returns throughout the 90s and 2000s and to the present. It is against this backdrop, therefore, that we must understand how the BJP promulgated these 3 laws back in June. As was mentioned earlier, there was no immediate crisis in agriculture. No farmer or laborer union leader was consulted in their drafting, and they were announced in the middle of a pandemic lockdown. Despite opposition, the BJP passed these 3 laws in a special session of parliament in September without proper procedure. So what are these laws? And let me just sort of briefly mention them in case people are unsure. The first law gives corporations the power to buy crops directly from farmers at fluctuating prices in private markets. So the change here is that before, as I mentioned, farmers sold their produce to government agents at MSP in government mandis. The second law allows corporations to stockpile grain in unlimited quantities. So they're able to buy when the prices are low, they can hold them, and then they can sell when the prices are high. The change here is that before, the government imposed limitations on essential commodities to prevent hoarding and speculation. Third, the third law allows corporations to engage in contracts with farmers without due legal recourse. So the change here is that before, corporations were prohibited from such asymmetrical arrangements. If you think of a contract that presupposes two equal parties, there can be no equality between a farmer and an Ambani. Taken together, this might seem benign. It uses the sort of language of freedom and choice to buy and sell, but these laws will effectively deregulate and privatize the agricultural sector. It will do so by creating a parallel private system alongside the public one, which will eventually weaken and collapse. As a result, this will undermine the public distribution system, upon which something like 60 to 70 to 80% of Indians have access to, by limiting the ability of the government to procure and distribute food grain for the poor. In effect, this will throw tens of millions of people into volatility and poverty, destabilize the livelihoods of hundreds of millions more, and jeopardize the food supply of 1.3 billion people. Now, the key point is that these are not agricultural reforms. Okay? These laws will not address any of the outstanding issues in agriculture. They won't fix the problem of water depletion, of monocropping, of chemical dependence, of farmer suicides, of land inequality. People have been demanding reforms for decades. Nobody was satisfied with the status quo. These laws are therefore nothing more than a corporate handover. So we have to understand that this protest emerged as a direct response to the prolonged yet foretold disaster of the Green Revolution. Now, the second theme, the politics of caste in Punjab. This is a rather contentious topic, as it should be. The specter of caste looms large over the history of Punjab, but it is rarely given sustained attention in sort of scholarly or popular terms. The first problem is that usually this topic takes the dynamics of the Hindu-dominated Ganga-Yamuna plains as its standard. So caste becomes a story of the fastidious Brahmin, the absentee landlord, the despised Dalit, of age-old Jajmani relations, of restrictions on touch, eating, learning, worship, and space, of the fourfold Varna system and the laws of money. Yet, as more and more scholarship is exploring, this supposedly all India framework does not actually work for most of the subcontinent. Now, what makes the ideology and operation of caste different in Punjab? There are at least sort of two sides to this question. On the one hand, and most obviously, is the dimension of religion. There are three as opposed to two major religions. There's actually four and even five religions. So alongside what becomes known as Hinduism, there is Islam and Sikhi. Islam arrives in the 9th and 10th century. It slowly grows in influence thereafter. Formerly, it doesn't have a caste hierarchy. There is a claim of equality for all Muslims. It offers a different cosmology and comportment to its adherents. And this is partly why many Dalits convert to Islam from around that time onward. Next is the emergence of Sikhi in the late 15th century. And here there is a distinction because it came out of a caste-ridden society. So it offers scathing critiques of the hypocrisy of the Pandit and the Mullah. And it represented a challenge both to Brahminical hierarchy as well as Mughal oppression. The key qualities of Sikhi for this issue that I think are important are Sikhi overturns the logic of purity and pollution by proclaiming the equality of all of humanity across gender, caste, class, region, and religious lines. It imparts a new outlook to the world from the hymns of the 10 Gurus, as well as Bhagat Kabir, Bhagat Ravidas, and Bhagat Namdev, and Baba Farid. It creates radical egalitarian practices like Langar and Seva, and it empowers the most downtrodden to confront their oppressors. And this is why Dalits and other subordinate castes convert in large numbers, especially in the 17th and 18th centuries. Later, with colonial rule, there's the appearance of two other religions. Christianity arrives with the Presbyterian and Catholic missionaries in the 1850s. Dalits convert in large numbers. And there's the advent of the Addar movement, led by Mangu Ram in the early 20th century, which is an explicitly Dalit-centered religion. So taken together, this creates a very unusual situation by the 1930s. And that is, Hinduism is a minority religion. There are powerful existing critiques of Brahmanism, and vast numbers of Dalits have already converted to other faiths. So that's on the one hand, religion. On the other hand is political economy. The nature of economic power in Punjab is based on changing land tenures. And this is a much more complicated story, and I'm trying to explain this in my book, but I'll mention sort of three moments for this conversation. Initially, Punjab's land tenure system had much in common with the rest of North India under Mughal rule. It was marked by absentee zamindars holding claim to the produce from large tracts of land tilled by various tenant cultivators. Significant change was initiated in the early 18th century with the rise of Banda Singh Bahadur. His key act was to abolish the power of the zamindars and largely expel them from the countryside. They were replaced by giving cultivators, and this was mostly Jats, but also Sanis and Arayans and Kambos and even Rajputs, a claim to the land that they tilled. And that system continued and expanded during the Sikh Missile period, and it was consolidated under the rule of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So it's from this point that the trajectory of Punjab's political economy begins to depart from the rest of North India. Finally, this system changes again under British rule from the 1850s onward. Here they deployed new technologies and strategies of surveillance, measurement, and calculation to create, for the first time, caste-based private property. Now, individuals identified by their caste became outright owners of parcels of land, from which they were expected to pay a share of produce as revenue to the government in the form of cash. So this is what radically alters the nature of hierarchy in the countryside. Jats emerge at the top, while Dalits of the Jamaat and Mazbi caste end up at the bottom, although both are implicated in agricultural production. So caste in Punjab is not part of a sort of conventional Hindu spiritual system, which means it doesn't have the same legitimacy as elsewhere. There is a sort of general absence of Brahmins and their doctrines on consumption and comportment, especially in the countryside. There are no prohibitions on learning or belief or worship in Sikhi and Islam. There is relatively less spatial segregation in villages or outright hostility in public places. And there is the notable strength of Dalits to manage and create their own institutions. And this is due to their education as well as their migration abroad and a new remittance economy. None of this is to deny inequality or conflict. Okay, we should be absolutely clear about this. Dalits are without question subordinated. They experience forms of discrimination, humiliation, and exploitation. By all social indicators, they occupy the lowest position in Punjabi society. Jat dominance, though, is unusual because it is a product of a new colonial regime of land ownership based on self-cultivation. These are people that don't have any hesitation in engaging in manual labor. They are not the sort of unproductive leeches that simply extract from the produce of others. Instead, they are active and energetic cultivators, often working alongside Dalits on collective yet unequal terms. And this is part of the messiness that we have to attend to. Now, to come to the present struggle, it's against this backdrop that Jats and Dalits have forged a remarkable form of contingent solidarity throughout this protest. Now, why is this solidarity so contingent? It is because there is an inherent tension between these two groups. Usually Jats as Kisans want a higher purchase price for their crops from the government, while Dalits as Mazdoors want higher wages from Kisans. So that means the relationship between the two is implicated in caste as well as class, or culture and economics. The two are intertwined and simultaneous. We must recall that Dalits are 32% of the population of Punjab. This is the highest proportion in the entire country. The majority work as agricultural laborers, yet they own less than 4% of land, so they are largely landless. Nevertheless, the Kisan and Mazdoor unions have forged an impressive unity, and it is based on sort of four shared interests. First, the fact is that they face a common threat from the BJP politics of bigoted and majoritarian Hindutva. This is a danger to everyone, and we're seeing the sort of nightmare unfold across India at this very moment. Second, these three laws directly harm Dalits because they aim to dismantle the public distribution system. They will increase the power of the Adanis and Ambanis to stockpile and manipulate food prices, which will mean greater precarity and unemployment for Dalits. Third, the Kisan unions are among the most progressive forces in Punjabi society and have directly supported Mazdoor unions in their own struggles against conservative Jats in the past. And fourth, the experience of the protest has exemplified Sikh principles of radical equality and community. So you have different castes sitting and sleeping alongside one another, cooking, eating, and cleaning together, and together confronting the state. And this is almost unimaginable in a conventional Hindu hierarchy. Some Dalit commentators have even named the sites around Delhi as a new Begumpura. Again, this does not mean that there aren't any shortcomings or potential pitfalls to this solidarity. Dalit concerns have not figured into the list of demands by the Sanयुkt Kisan Morcha, and that would be namely sort of higher wages and access to vacant lands. Dalit participation is not as prominent. They're not often speaking on the stage or on the negotiating committees. And Dalits have, to a degree, been distanced by the arrogance and callousness of some Jats. And this is in person, on the ground, but also a lot of the sort of online activism and in some of the sort of popular culture music. Most thoughtful and far-sighted people have insisted that these issues be addressed rather than denied and deferred. So this is a kind of active struggle within a struggle happening. We must remember that solidarity is neither resolution nor fiction. So we don't have to exaggerate or romanticize solidarity, but nor can we afford to be merely cynical and dismiss it. I think we have to invest in the new possibilities for equality and equity that this struggle has created. Okay, now the last theme is global capitalism. This struggle represents a larger challenge to the everyday logic of neoliberal capital. What farmers in India are confronting is a perverse and pervasive set of assumptions and values that structure our world. Simply put, they fear these laws will lead to their gradual impoverishment and eventual eviction from agriculture altogether. Such concerns are far from idle. In fact, the Indian government and its supporters repeatedly claim that cultivation has become stagnant and that a greater proportion of people need to be moved into other occupations. Yet, instead of addressing the technical problems in agricultural policy, which people have been demanding for decades, or developing greater local manufacturing capacity, the government is content to allow private corporations to leverage their immense purchasing power to manipulate prices and control the food supply chain. Market imperatives will then dictate cultivation practices, which will set off waves of uncertainty, indebtedness, and consolidation in the countryside. So again, far from reforms, these laws are little more than a license for corporate monopolizing that will lead to rural displacement. In this sense, the Indian government is pursuing a derivative strategy of accumulation. It is an attempt to follow the trajectory of 18th century England, where peasants were forcibly expelled from their villages to end up in cities as factory workers or as soldiers and settlers in various imperial ventures. This sequence of rural to urban transition remains a key feature in the narrative of economic development. It has acquired the status of almost a blueprint because it is assumed to have taken place in almost every large country with an advanced economy. Yet 21st century India scarcely offers the same chimeric options. Why? Because remunerative manufacturing jobs are pitifully few, and there is no scope for colonizing entire continents. A more likely prospect for ex-farmers will be to join the swelling ranks of the urban poor to find whatever haphazard work is available, while a small fraction desperately seeks migration abroad. So the farmer and laborer protest is a revolution against capitalist inevitability. It demonstrates a critique of the stale logics of deregulation, privatization, and dispossession. After all, it is dogmatic to insist that small-scale independent cultivation cannot be made viable, or that public investment and regulation cannot become efficient. In Punjab, there are several initiatives underway for joint cultivation and resource pooling, which involves large numbers of farmers and even landless laborers. These techniques could become equitable and sustainable and even scalable if given the right support. Private enterprise, on the other hand, is neither a guarantor of general prosperity, nor an automatic steward for the environment. Again, only dogma can conceal the disastrous consequences of the spread of monocropping, chemical dependence, and factory farming across the world. Indeed, if free markets were so effective, the US would not maintain subsidies for its agribusinesses while insisting countries like India end supports and protections for their farmers. Such hypocrisy has been crucial for upholding the disparity between global North and South. So the fortunes of the struggle at the borders of Delhi have implications for the rest of the world. It is not a matter of just human rights or the freedom to express dissent or peacefully protest. The power of capital is not receptive to spoken truths, right? However eloquent they might be. Rather, farmers in India are battling to articulate new kinds of economic rights, to subvert the current neoliberal orthodoxy in order to place collective well-being at the center of democratic politics. So this is therefore a struggle of global dimensions as much as it is of global imaginations. So with that, I'll stop. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Navyug. That was excellent, wonderful timing. Thank you for that. I wanted to thank you just for the very clear-sighted and powerful presentation in which you talk about these three really important themes around green revolution, politics of caste, and global capitalism. And that's just three dimensions of this really complex agitation and its global ramifications. So thank you. So next, I would like to invite Dr. Jasdev Singh Rai to offer his presentation. Dr. Rai, are you there? Is your mic and video on? We're ready for you. And you'll have about 30 minutes to speak as well.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
You have to start the video, I think. Hold on. Have I started the video? No.
And now you just start your video. Yeah, there you go.
Okay. All right. Okay. Hi.
Perfect.
All right. Thank you. There have been very, very interesting contributions from the previous speakers, and there doesn't really leave me much to say, although I can continue for half an hour, I hope. I'll be touching on what these farm laws have raised and exposed, and I believe a number of issues about the political institutions in India, global corporate sector, and India's economic future, as well as the cultural conflicts. As you know, food security is becoming a major issue around the world. With climate change and increasing population, it is obvious that cultivable land is going to diminish, while number of people to feed is increasing. As in sectors where there is a possibility of shortfalls or considerable profits to be made, the corporate sector tries to come in. Moreover, countries try to secure food security for current needs and for the future. Several Western countries have an interest in exporting to India and further invest in agribusiness in India. A very powerful group of 19 countries called the Keynes Group, who among them account for more than 25% of the world's agriculture export, are campaigning for liberalization of agriculture sector. It wants to achieve free and fair trade in agriculture that provides real and sustainable benefits for the developing world. They have been pushing WTO to insist India reduce or take out subsidies to farmers. These countries include Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Indonesia, and a few others. The main Western countries are Canada and Australia. And it's interesting what they say on their official websites regarding India's agriculture. Australia says that India offers a great opportunity to export as it feels there will be a shortfall in a few years. Currently, India is exporting the food grains, and has an excess of it. The Australian government's analysis is the sector is highly inefficient and output is volatile. There are inadequate linkages to markets and distorted pricing mechanisms. There's scarcity of resources, especially water. There's infrastructure and storage gaps and logistic challenges for distributing produce. Now, interesting, these are the things that the government of India has been defending its policies or the farm laws with. And then it says a strategic decision by the Australian government is to work more closely with India on reducing the need for market distortions. What that means is the subsidies and developing import pathways that can both respond to Indian priorities and ultimately help commercial engagement. That means foreign direct investment into India. Okay. Canada is another country that has been actively raising the issue of subsidies and especially minimum support price or MSP in India and wants India to open its market. On its government side, it says there has been recent trade restrictions. Let me close this window. I live near the airport. There have been restrictions imposed on pulse importations from Canada to respond to the local pulse crisis in 2017, which Canadian authorities are working to address. It is one of the reasons, and I'll tell you, that Sikh MPs in Canada are completely quiet on the essence of the farmers' issue, because they know that their government and their agribusiness is one of the causes of the whole, the three farm laws. Canadian agribusiness wants to export and go into India. It wants India to reduce subsidies and tariffs on imports. And they have been lobbying, all these countries have been lobbying at the World Trade Organization to persuade India to either reduce the subsidies or completely finish them. Now, India is also keen to attract foreign direct investments in the agriculture sector. There's been some $2.02 billion investment between 2000 and 2017. As you know, the Modi gave up the Manmohan Singh policy of made in India. That means the Indians will begin to create things or invent things. And Modi now wants to make India the production house of the world, just as China was initially. And his policy is make in India. So come and make in India. And part of that policy is also invest in the agriculture business. So the Department of Agriculture and Cooperation under the Ministry has Agriculture has signed agreements with several countries, including the United States. Similarly, the Department of Agriculture, Research and Education and Department of Animal Husbandry, Dairying, Fisheries and the Ministry of Agriculture have also signed agreements with many countries. So these agreements seek to provide better agriculture facilities in research and development, capacity building, post-harvest management, food processing, plant protection, animal husbandry, fisheries, etc. The agreements could help enhance bilateral trade as well. So these are on Government of India websites. In India, the WTO regime, free trade agreements and bilateral treaty investment agreements such as preferential trade agreements and comprehensive economic partnership agreements work either to reduce or eliminate customs, tariffs and non-tariff barriers on significant trade between India and its trading partner. India has negotiated a number of these free trade agreements, largely with trading partners across Asia, as well as outside Asia. It's Western countries now want part of the cake. Now, is there a need for reform? Yes, there is a need for reform. India, I mean, everybody, the farmers themselves say there is a need for reform. Um, uh, and some of the speakers have pointed out, both farmers and academics agree that there is a need for reforms in Indian agriculture. The subsidies are archaic and not well thought out. For instance, by setting up a minimum support price for rice higher than wheat, farmers in Punjab want to grow rice. And Punjab is not the natural terrain for rice. So what do farmers do? They try and get deeper, they'll go deeper and deeper to get water. And especially when people like Badal have been giving free electricity or they're subsidized electricity, then it's not very difficult to see why the water table is going down. Okay? In contrast, let's say the subsidies in EU are very constructive. 80% of farmers in EU are also small farmers. Farmers are given 250 euros per acre of land. They are then requested to set aside a part of their farm and not grow anything on this acreage for environmental reasons. They get another 100 euros for each acre that they set aside. Then the farmers sell their product in the market. The government does set a fair price. If the farmer gets a lower price, then the government compensates and gives that, makes it up to that price. And the government lets the farmers know which products it will set the price for and wants in that year. Now this is why farming in Europe is a bit more environmentally friendly, whereas in India, it's very competitive and farmers try and grow crops which will maximize their earnings. So there is another dimension to this. This is the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Peasants. It was passed in 2018 after 17 years of lobbying by various countries. It was introduced by an Indonesian farmer union. And India was one of the countries leading the lobbying for this. The key parts of the declaration are, there must be a minimum price for the crops that take into account inputs. Farmers must have access to independent courts in case of any disputes, and any policy change must be in consultation with the farmers and involvement of farmers. Now, if you know the history of these three farm laws, India has breached all these three, reneged on all these three domestically. While at the international level, it's been pushing for these at the domestic level, it has gone completely against this. And this has caused a lot of distrust between the farmers and the government of India. There are, of course, the culture dynamics and domestic dynamics in all this. While it is easy to blame BJP and Ambani and Danis, those who are supporting farmers need to understand that a significant pressure is international. It is a corporate agribusiness through the government that has been pushing India to remove subsidies. Now, the interesting fact is that many of these countries have subsidies in their own countries, such as Canada, USA, and EU, who have been active in the WTO, pushing India to remove subsidies. The pressure isn't new, and this is where the Modi government fails. Previous Indian governments have resisted it. They've had plans on the shelf, but understood that intervention of the extent that has happened now could lead to unrest and agitations. This has been commented by the WTO itself, that said long ago, before these laws were introduced, that any change or significant change of the type that India has introduced will lead to political unrest and protest. Now, the difference with the previous government is that Modi has been overconfident in his abilities and powers. Modi and BJP have used Hindutva as a cultural nationalism extremely successfully to marginalize opposition and challenges, as the government was lobbied by corporate sectors internationally and domestically. The Modi government felt confident that it could push these through without much challenge. So the second fact that is often happens, and in many other countries, is the corporate sector hijacks a local movement. You saw that in the Brexit. We saw that in the when the neocons were fighting for the wars in Middle East. There was the whole the military industrial sector had taken over the policies of the USA, and now the corporate sector in India has essentially hijacked Hindutva, and they're pushing their own agendas, their own profits, and expanding their footprint across India, dominating or monopolizing the business sector there. And so there are all these very shady characters behind this whole this whole thing. The accusation, and then there are accusations in the songs from various platforms that this is a Hindutva strategy to annihilate Sikhs in Punjab. Well, it's not quite unjustified because you've seen how in Brexit, it was all about nationalism and the Europeans coming over, taking over. Our prime minister even said that the Turkish are going to invade the British. And you see all these sort of in the Trump era, you saw a lot of this. So what is happening is at the highest level, at the corporate level, there is probably no intention to annihilate anybody, but they are using that cultural, political, nasty sort of campaigning. And the average member of Hindutva signed up to Hindutva in the BJP RSS is being told that the expansion of Hinduism in parts of India that have resisted it will come through these sort of policies and defeating some of the communities that are standing up to it. Unfortunately, this hasn't really worked, and in my opinion, the farmers have been very, very deft in ensuring that this is a pan-India movement, and it's not just one religion or one community. So one last question in this is, how come in the Indian federal system, a government can pass and laws so easily and push them against states? Well, India, promotes itself as the largest democracy with many minorities, languages, previously independent kingdoms federating as a union in 1947. It has a bicameral parliamentary system. There are two houses, the lower house. The main parliament called Lok Sabha has 550 seats elected directly by people. The seats are divided according to size and population in its 28 sectors, states, and 8 union territories. It's a first past the post system like the UK. The upper house called Rajya Sabha has about 245 seats. Apart from 12 members appointed by the president, the Rajya Sabha largely represents the 28 states in India, just as the Senate does in USA or the Council of States does in Switzerland. But the upper house is based on almost similar principle of division of seats as the lower house. That is, seats are allocated to each state according to size and population of the state. So representatives are chosen by state legislature. It follows the Westminster model of majoritarian system voting. In contrast, you see the states in USA have only 2 senators each, irrespective of the size or population of the state. So that sort of works as a balance, as a check and balance against the power of, let's say, majoritarianism. Similarly, in the Council of States in Switzerland, each cantonment has only 2 members each. So in many democratic countries where there are 2 houses, the upper house, which represent the states, has similar number of members from each of the states to act as a check and balance against the power of the central government. To me, the political purpose of the upper house has never been clear. What is it there for anyway? Small states like Punjab only have 7 representatives. Uttar Pradesh has 31 representatives, and half of the 28 states between them only have 36 seats. What are they going to? How are they going to protect themselves against this sort of bulldozing of policies that central government sometimes does? And but the Hindu belt has something like 130 seats. So you can see it's very easy to pass in the Lok Sabha and the upper house in the Rajya Sabha and not have and call it democratic. So the framework for the Indian Constitution, as you well know, was based on the 1935 All India Act, which was introduced by the British to rule over India, not with India, not for India, not with the Indians. Okay, it was and currently the political structure, the institutional structure, the constitutional structure is the same. So large states and the elite can rule over Indians. So you can see why it's all been. There's been a mess since 1947, and you can see the mess now coming on the streets of Delhi. This is, in my opinion, a big democratic deficit in India since 1947. So where do we go now? In my opinion, the standoff has reached a stagnant place. The Punjabis, well, especially the Sikhs, they have long developed a culture approach to political problems of a perpetual resistance. There are always songs drawing on religion and history, so they rarely appear to be moved towards solutions. Either there is a lack of ideas in the Sikh leadership or the Sikh community, or a culture of perpetual victimhood that has become deeply ingrained. So we see in 84, 1947, and now, but there is no sort of move in how do you take this further. The whole international community was willing to support it, but there's not been any effort on the part of those people in India, the farmers, to try and leverage that. From the Modi BJP, there is another dynamic. It is based on a whole false vision of the Hindu state that really cannot be achieved. Okay? However, it drives the average Hindu or its member In fact, the word Hindu to me itself is a contentious word. I don't understand what it means. I know there's a lot of departments of Hinduism, etc. I really don't understand what it means, because it was a political word created by the Muslims and others, and it has no history in the Shastras or the Vedas, etc. So anyway, that's not the discussion here. But it's now become a political. The BJP has made a corporate version of the indigenous belief system and calling it Hindu. So to me, nevertheless, this conflict has cultural, sort of undertones. There is a international corporate sector trying to move into Indian agribusiness and wants to take over the agriculture sector. There are big domestic corporate sectors who've hijacked Hindutva and using it for improving their finances, just as the Tata and the Birla did with the Indian Congress Party in the 1947 onward. So I think the future is not that bad. I think, in my opinion, this is going to weaken Hindutva. It's going to weaken BJP. It probably might grow a little bit more, but I think in the long run, what has happened is the farmers' leaders have been quite savvy to ensure that the protest is a single issue movement and marginalize all those political interests. I believe that there will be a new future for India, and my feeling is that this will probably lead to a bit more a stronger federalism and decentralization of power. I think it is dawning on many other states that the center is too big for its own boots. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rai, for that wonderful presentation. You managed to pack up so many themes in this really short amount of time. I love the way that you extended upon Navyug's earlier presentation, and especially talked about political economy on this international global scale, pointed to the shift to FDI in India and the ongoing neoliberalization, corporatization of agricultural sector happening globally. And then your critique of liberal democracy from 1947 onwards, your discussion about some of the limitations in political and intellectual leadership within our communities, and then ending on these reflections on the future. That was fantastic. So I think these two presentations really spoke well together. Just as a reminder, please go ahead and keep populating your questions in the Q&A. At this point, I would like us to address some of the questions, Dr. Rai and Dr. Gill. I think I'll get us started off because there was an earlier question that came in from a community member, Lal Singh, and he actually had asked this question in the first session, but I think it's appropriate for this session. And I'll read that one and Baljit Kaur's questions, and then we can move on to address the latter two or three that have come in. Lal Singh asks, how could we empower Indian farmers to compete in a global market since the Indian government seems under such huge pressure from the WTO? Both of you spoke about global capitalism and this international scale of neoliberalization. So what is our form of resistance against that? What does that look like? He also asked, my other question is about budget limitations of government of India to support procurement of crops eligible for MSP and maintaining the public distribution system. So other kinds of challenges and bottlenecks that are in place. Baljit Kaur also asked, in the context of how globalization has affected agriculture, is there an example or two or of any country which has been able to stop or reverse these processes? If yes, how? So why don't we start there and have both of you sort of reflect on that, and then we can move into some of the other ones. Navyug, do you want to get us?
Sure, I can try to offer some thoughts. Excellent questions, very, very provocative. So to Lal Singh's question, I think two parts to that: how to empower Indian farmers to compete in this kind of global market. I think that it actually has to take. There are two different tracks. One is that Indian farmers are actually engaging in this struggle in India. So they're actually going to fight that struggle. They have been fighting it, and it will be decided whether they succeed or not within the context of the Indian government's policies that they're trying to push through. I think in terms of people in the diaspora talking about supporting Indian farmers in this sort of global dynamic, it's actually incumbent on us to fight against governments that are demanding these neoliberal changes in other parts of the world. So we should not be satisfied with the kind of mealy-mouthed statements of support from politicians saying something like, people have a right to protest and we ought to kind of respect that. No, we should actually be fighting against the US or Canadian or British or whatever governments to stop demanding that countries in the global south dismantle their subsidies and supports while keeping them intact for agribusinesses here. I think that should be our thrust. We actually have to disabuse ourselves of this notion that public investment is inefficient and that only private enterprise can ensure prosperity. This is nonsense. This is like sort of zealous, dogmatic, ideologues that are kind of pushing this narrative. And I think it's shown to sort of be collapsing and causing, distress and disaster in so many places across the world. So I think that is actually our primary duty, to actually fight from the source of these sort of global policies. The struggle in India, I think, will continue and find its own trajectory. Just quickly on the budget problem, I think that the budget problem is a bit of a red herring in the sense that this happens in this country too, right? In the US, where they sort of do this hulka of how can we afford to pay for student debt cancellation? How can we afford to pay for universal health care? How can we pay for, and they give you some astronomical sums. Nobody asks the billions and even trillions that are spent on the military budgets, right? Those somehow, there's always money for the military. There's almost always money for wars of conquest and corporate handouts. What's actually more unique is that the amount the government spends on procurement, it actually then is a portion of that comes back in the form of selling those grains to corporations that sell them to people. So it's not just an outright expenditure. They might spend a vast amount of money to buy grain from farmers, but then that grain is also resold. So a bunch of money comes back. And then fundamentally, what is the purpose of a state if it doesn't ensure the well-being of its people? Why do we have a state, right? We should actually maybe put that question on the table. The last point for Baljit Kaur, I would just say, there are instances, I think the example of China is very interesting. And there's a whole kind of sub-conversation about China and sort of global politics and how one reads China. And of course, it's a kind of, one-party state and doesn't have the same sort of, democratic modalities as, say, India pretends to be. But the transition of Chinese sort of farmers into urban centers, of course, has its dislocations and has its kind of brutality. But it was achieved in a far different way than I think what other countries have kind of done previously and what the Indian government is trying to do now. I don't think, by the way, that there are any perfect models. I think the struggle is going to have to produce new answers to these old questions.
Dr. Rai, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah. I mean, the globalization pressure is not something new. It's been there now for 60 years. So, and previous Indian governments have resisted it. Look at the EU. One of the big things between Britain and France, the contentious issue was the French just refused to stop subsidizing farming. And there are quite a few other Eastern European countries who refuse to stop subsidizing farming. 78% of European farms are small farms between 2 acres, just like Punjab, to 10 acres. Yeah. And China, 90% of the farms are small farms. There are plenty of countries who have just basically told the WTO where to go. Now, this government, in my opinion, it created a great rhetoric against the East India Company. It is essentially letting those situation again in, bringing the corporate sector in to take over the most important thing in people's lives, that is land. So I think it's interesting in because we held a big press conference in Switzerland for 3 of the farmer leaders, or 5 of them really, including an environmentalist, etc., at the Geneva Press Club, and they were saying that in one of the meetings between the government and the farm leaders, the government said, we will die but not come under international pressure. And some of them said, well, you're already under international pressure, under the WTO. That's why you introduced these policies. So, so it's up to if Manmohan Singh could resist it, Modi can resist it if he's really a strong man.
Thank you. So we have time to do another round of questions. So I'm going to try to consolidate a couple and then have you respond again. Harjeet Gadawal at University of Calgary asked, Navyug, thanks for the great talk. Why do you think that the Dalit issues have not been able to be voiced to the same extent as farmers during the protests? The consequences for farmers, as you suggested, will be very similar in terms of recourse to migrant labor patterns in India, as we saw in Bihar. As you and other speakers have recognized, farming is reliant on labor and impacted by labor changes. How can issues with labor rights and changes to labor laws get greater consideration if we accept the issues and recent legal shifts are linked? How does caste play into how such laws are written, debated, disputed? Can linking the issues better have an impact on the politics of caste and attempts to continue to divide people so that protests fail? So that's one question around caste politics and legal infrastructure. The second one, there's another question by Damanjit Singh, who's at UCLA. Damanjit writes, Fanon discusses revolution's therapeutic effect for a number of social ills in colonized society. How does the Morcha, with its caste solidarities, the shift in music from toxicity to empowerment, as Dr. Abbi described, mutual aid, and the drying of Uttar Punjab's kacheras on Indian tanks enact something similar for Punjab? So this kind of therapeutic effect. And how might these changes live on in the afterlife of the Kisan Morcha? And I think related to that, there was a question about what accounts for the rise of feelings of victimhood within the Sikh community, and how can Sikhs come out of this mindset? I think those two are related. So why don't we, Navyug, why don't you start by responding to the caste question, and then we can have Dr. Rai also respond to the others.
Sure. Thank you, Harjeet. Excellent question, as always. So why haven't Dalit demands sort of emerged at the forefront? It's a complicated, sort of messy question. I tried to kind of share some of those tensions. First, we should say that the demands, primarily in the kind of narrowest sense, are one for higher wages for agricultural labor, the daily sort of wage rate, and that is directly from Kisans. And so that is a kind of employer-employee tension. More expansively is the struggle of Dalits to acquire 1/3 of village common lands for their own cultivation. This is based on a 1961 statute that says Dalits are entitled to Shamlat lands, Panchayati Shamlat lands in villages, 1/3. And this is routinely kind of subverted throughout Punjab, but there's been a group called the Zameen Prapati Sangharsh Committee that's been active for about a decade or two that has worked to get Dalits to actually acquire this land and sort of resist conservative Jats from sort of monopolizing it. And when they do acquire this land, they engage in kind of collective agriculture, everybody sort of contributing labor and then distributing the kind of returns. And it has profound consequences in terms of income, but self-esteem and kind of social standing as well. So the Zameen Prapati Sangharsh Committee is engaged in this. It is a Dalit-led group. They have alliances with Kisan unions led by Jats. So that is a struggle that is happening. But those two struggles of wages and Shamlat are very much struggles within the kind of context of Punjab. They don't really factor into these laws necessarily, and it's not something that one can demand of the central government per se. Now, the reason why Dalits are not as prominent, I think it is about entrenched arrogance and entrenched hierarchy, and the kind of sort of monopolizing of space that Jats have in Punjab. I think this is slowly shifting. And I think that there are groups and people on the ground that are recognizing not only that Dalits are 1/3 of the population, but also that it's a kind of ethical question. People recognize the kind of contradiction in this hierarchy, especially in the land of the Gurus, the claim of equality, and people are kind of making that, I think, sort of more active. And the idea is that in the course of this struggle, when these laws are repealed, and this movement succeeds, that will strengthen the groups that are engaged in this struggle to go on and continue all sorts of struggles in Punjab. There is no return to a status quo. It's not that these laws will get repealed and then we'll sort of continue with whatever it was before. No, I think this is the terrain for all sorts of far-reaching struggles, and one can sort of hope that this is where the direction things will go.
Right. Is it me? Okay. Yeah, the caste thing is not something I'm a specialist in. In fact, I challenge the very word caste. I mean, when Britain was trying to introduce caste legislation, I told them define it. They said it exists, it's in the Indian constitution. I said, well, the Indians follow everything you do, you define it. And they were able to come up with the definition. I know a lot of academics have made their careers on the basis of this, but I'm come from a medical scientific background, and if you can't define something, it's nonsense. So I don't subscribe to this caste narratives and academia and all that stuff thing. I see it very differently. But so I won't touch on that. I mean, it's obvious in Indian politics since 1947, they use communities, they caste and Dalits and everybody divided. So vote banks have been created through many differences, but that's another matter. I think the issue of, I'm not sure whether this struggle has now become a caste struggle or one Jat struggle, because it was quite interesting for the first time since 84. The Punjabi Hindus, especially the Bania and the Jats, got together, and they're on the same side. And there are many people on the same side. The Haryani Jats are on the same side. So it's crossed the boundaries of these divisions that various Indian governments and politicians have nurtured over since 47, I think, and more since 1984. And I think the farmers' leaders have been quite clever in maintaining that sort of a cross-sectionality in all this. On the thing about the Sikh victimhood, how do you cross that? Well, I think victimhood has become quite profitable now. Whether it's the song, the people who sing the songs, they make a lot of money out of this. If you look at the institutions I won't tell you the name of the Gurdwara. There was a meeting at a local Gurdwara here. We must help the farmers there. Right, fine. So they called me as well. And they wanted to collect a few hundred, well, quite a lot of thousands of pounds. And where was it going to go? Well, should send this to the farmers, because the tires and the tractors they're going to get punctured, and they need the money for that. And I said to them, I can see now Modi not being able to sleep because the tires of the tractors are going to be repaired by you from outside. Do you really think the farmers of India in Punjab want money for tire tractors? See, there's no intentions to look for solutions, because it creates a little group which can raise money and send it there. So I think victimhood among Sikhs has become quite profitable. So it's become a corporatization in itself. I think that would be an interesting study for some academic or other, until I think a new generation starts breaking through it and looks for solutions. I can't see it going away, really.
Thank you so much for those reflections. There's several more questions in the chat, so if there are any that you would like to respond to, feel free to go ahead. At this point, I'd like to invite our panelists from the first session, Dr. Himanshu and Dr. Kumool Abbi, if you would also like to turn on your video screens. And it would be great if all of you could maybe respond to each other if you have thoughts about each other's presentations, or would like to ask questions of each other or clarify points or anything of the sort. And then I think we'll move into wrapping up. So yeah, anybody can jump in at this point.
No questions, but I find the two presentations very fascinating. Where I do find it a little difficult to agree with Jasdev is the issue of this whole issue of caste, because I think that's something which is reality, and I think the longer we ignore, the longer we not talk about it, and it's not just about the academic discussion. I mean, yes, you're right, many people have written about it, and this is something which is part of it. But I think it's also something which is very integral to the whole issue that you're talking about, the whole food security issue, the whole issue of agriculture, the whole issue of corporatization, and how it is all linked to where the caste issue has played an important role. Good way, in some ways, you can close your eyes and then say that, okay, this is something which doesn't exist, it's an irrelevant issue, but it has an repercussion. And I think one needs a more nuanced understanding of these issues than simply dismissing it, which is I felt. Quickly, just I wanted to bring in the other issue is that there is so much focus on Punjabi, Sikh, Punjab, and agriculture, all of this. In some ways, we are forgetting that the link between Punjab and other provinces, Punjab and other states, and how other states view Punjab or Punjabi agriculture or Punjabi farmers is an important part of the overall story. I mean, yes, Punjabis have their own understanding of how people view Punjabi farmers or Punjab agriculture, but there is a huge amount of difference between what the Bengalis think about Punjabi farmers, what the Biharis think about Punjabi farmers, and what the Marathis think about Punjabi farmers. And that, if it is, the solution has to be, or there is some kind of a progress in terms of an Indian union, then that interaction also has to happen. And I don't see much of that discussion happening at this point of time, which to me is something which needs to be more and more understanding of these interstate or provincial understanding of issues, because I find that there is a huge amount of commonality as far as the basic issues are concerned. It's just that there's no dialogue that is happening. And that dialogue has to happen if it has to be a universal question or universal issue. A very fascinating way of, I am not a Sikh, and therefore for me it was a very fascinating way of understanding the whole issue. But I do find space which is available for others to intervene and to learn and also build bridges, and in a sense make the whole issue more cohesive than what it appears as of now.
Anneeth, should I say a couple of things?
Please go ahead.
Just quickly, yeah, this is very generative. I think there was something I think Dr. Himanshu mentioned in his presentation that's maybe worth considering, and that is how this struggle spreads across India and how it sort of moves out of the kind of confines of Punjab and Haryana. I think there's two sides to it. One is that these laws have an effect across the entire country. These are, and I think on maybe two scores. One is that they will affect the PDS system, which 60 to 70% of Indians depend on. The midday meal schemes, the atta dal, the different ways in which people across India get subsidized food will be severely impacted if these laws are kind of implemented. And not immediately, but within 2 or 3 or 4 years, when the public mandis are dismantled, then there will be no ability for the government to procure those grains. So that is one sort of all India effect. The other is that these laws are a violation of the Indian Constitution, because agriculture is supposed to be a state subject. And so they kind of manipulate language and kind of subvert some terms and pretend they're not going to do it, but they're actually going to do it. So this has, I think, consequences for regional autonomy, for states' rights, and people across the country ought to be concerned, because if these laws are kind of upheld and implemented, I think it will kind of further centralize power in Delhi. The other side of it is that the Kisan unions have made one of the demands that there should be an MSP as a legal right for all Kisans across the country. That is the pan-India scope. It's not about preserving sort of privileges for Punjabi or Haryanvi farmers. It's about no farmer should have to suffer the volatility of the market, and that there should be a kind of MSP rational, logical system across the country. And that would be what was mentioned earlier, removing maybe MSP for rice in places like Punjab where it's an alien crop, and putting higher MSPs for other crops that are indigenous to the region, and maintaining MSP in places like Bihar or Maharashtra or Tamil Nadu for crops that are more suitable for those climates. So that is very much possible. That is what the far-sighted union leaders have put forward. Of course, it's a struggle. And it's also, I think, incumbent on the Kisan unions in Maharashtra or Tamil Nadu or Andhra to respond to this call and mobilize in those states. I mean, we can't expect sort of people in Punjab that are fighting this vicious Hindutva state to sort of do everything all at once. So maybe recognize the kind of constraints under which people are engaged in this struggle.
Dr. Himanshu, did you have something?
Yeah, I just want to respond to this. I mean, I agree with Navyug's point on this. And I just don't want to be a debate between two of us, but just to point out, see the whole PDS thing, yes, I agree that the PDS is very, very important part of it, and that is a point. But remember, the PDS consumers are in Bihar, Orissa, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, those places. But those people have absolutely there is no protest about as far as the MSP is concerned, simply because they are not getting it. I mean, like, I'll tell you the data for the last year. Last year, when the wheat procurement is concerned, wheat procurement, 12 million or 13 million tons were procured in Punjab. Less than 5,000 tons was procured in Bihar. I mean, if you look at the total procurement, obviously the Bihari farmer is not, but what it has created, that when Bihar APMC was abolished in 2006, the Punjabi traders found a way of taking away the Bihar produce and selling it in mandis in Punjab. This is well known, everybody knows it. So I think in some ways, there has to be understanding also. I mean, you can't simply be talking about MSP guarantee, where I don't know whether MSP exists or not. And there has to be understanding. So I think this is something where the dialogue has to go beyond that. Nobody is saying that the Punjabi farmers have to take the lead, but there has to be a universal issue. So the fight for MSP, the PDS fight has to be, the guarantee for PDS also has to come from the Sanयुkt Morcha. The Sanयुkt Morcha has to fight for that. If they are not only talking about MSP guarantee and they are not talking about PDS guarantee, then they are not doing justice. They will not be able to get a larger majority. And that's the point I was making.
Dr. Abbi, I wanted to bring you into the conversation. I think your presentation really beautifully talked about all the cultural productions surrounding the protest movement. And I think it responds really well, possibly to Damanjeet's question about how might these changes live on in the afterlife of the Morcha. So do you have thoughts on what kinds of practices that you are studying and analyzing on the ground? How might they continue even speculatively in the future moving forward when we have a post-protest future? Do you see some of this living on? Oops, sorry, I think you're muted.
This question is generally asked, particularly in the context of women. That is it, that after all this, the women who are participating in the morchas, who are coming out of the homes, will this kind of a thing continue? Similarly, as this discussion has been going on about Dalits and Jats, on one side, Jats are losing out, or will the Dalits be gaining in the place? Who will be, what will be the kind of composition or churning would take place? And as Navyug said, that though we say it's the status quo, but with all this, combinations, churning, shaking going on, will things come back to the same pattern, which is something difficult to say, or this was, a kind of carnival's movement, or a kind of spirit of liminality? Will things come back to the same? That is something which is, which time will tell. But I don't think, that when we're talking about women are moving out of spaces, they're questioning, they're expressing themselves. Similarly, you have the whole issue of the Dalits, who are also interacting with the Jats. They are, participating in struggles. Now, somehow, on one side, the struggle is for the land, the struggle is for the Jats primarily, but at the same time, it also affects their sense of empowerment. So I don't think that once they have made the marginalized groups a part of the struggles, whether for symbolic effect or for, wanting them to be really part of it, it would not be that, after it, that they all come back to the same position. I don't think so. Definitely some small steps for change would take place. Now, one more thing I would like to tell all the panelists is that we have discussed the Dalits and the Jat Sikhs, but one thing which one set of people whom we have to some extent ignored is the Aratyas, are the money lenders, who play a very important role in the Punjab economy, and they are also very important glue. This Mandi, the whole connection between the Jats, Dalits, is the Aratyas and the money lenders, who are almost, they, people said they have very dominating role in this movement. So I think as scholars, you should also look at these issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anybody else would like to jump in? Yes, Dr. Rai, go ahead.
Yeah, I know there's been this issue about the casting. As I said, it's not. I think it's not the subject of this talk. We're talking about farmers thing, and I'm quite happy if the university wants to hold another session on caste. I'd be quite happy to challenge all the current narratives that have informed Indian academia, Indian discourse, Indian things. I mean, the only challenge I gave to my government when it started to introduce the law was define it. You can't make a law on ferries. Yeah? If you can't define the word, what is the law going to serve? And they could not come up with a definition of the word caste. So what they said was, okay, fine, we leave it. They dropped the law. Right? So I know it's a colonial narrative that is continuing to feed in the whole system, but that's another matter. If Arvind wants to hold a conference, I'm quite happy. On the, I don't know if you know, the leaders, the main leader of the farmers' leaders is not even a Jat nor a Sikh. Eh? Darshan-Pal, go and find out his surname and you'll find out he's not even a Jat or a Sikh. Yeah? So, and many of the other people are not in there. And I do feel this movement is going to go outside Punjab because Punjabis are not good at finding solutions. As I said, they are very good at resistance and all that, but solutions often come from other parts of India. And I suspect that's where it's going to come from. Some other highly intelligent leadership will emerge and resolve this through. And I think that is going to be probably the downfall of BJP. So thank you.
Navyug?
Yeah, just quickly, I think Tamanjeet's question maybe got lost in the, didn't get responded to in full detail. The point was made about how to kind of understand Fanon and his sort of charge. I think it's a very important angle to think of because one of the things Fanon gives us insight is to question the sort of convenient sort of process of decolonization, to kind of put pressure on the idea that once independence is achieved, we have decolonized. And actually is a kind of radical rethinking of what it means to be liberated. And I think if we look at it in the context of Indian history, it's actually quite clear, and it might trouble some Indian nationalists, but 1947 was a transfer of power. It was not a kind of revolutionary sort of achievement of national liberation. The Congress Party was keen on kind of inheriting the structures of authority from the colonial state and continuing with them as the kind of monopolistic sort of party afterwards. And for places like Punjab and Bengal and elsewhere, 47 was a disaster. It was an absolute kind of nightmare and a real kind of civil war that kind of ravaged society. You know, people called 1947 at the time a Chutti Azadi, and Nehru was shown black flags throughout Punjab. This is not anachronistic. This was right at the time then. And I think that should make us think about the unfinished project of decolonization. And again, Fanon is maybe talking about Algeria, and we can think of Vietnam, but the unfinished project for India, I think it looms large in this struggle. I don't think that the current protest is configured in that same revolutionary upsurge. We should be aware of its kind of limitations. It is about repealing these 3 laws and extracting concessions from the central government. But there are all sorts of, I think, potentialities. And I think it's worth us kind of thinking through them carefully.
Okay, so it sounds like that might have been the final word so far. I love just ending on thinking about potentialities and futures, and on the note of continuing to think through what decolonization means, and in the context of both old empires and new empires, including this form of neoliberal empire and the local, national, and international global diasporic scale of our resistance. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Arvind to kind of wrap us up and start talking about possibly our next event.
Thank you so much, Anneeth. Thank you to all of the participants. It was an amazing dialogue between all of you. Great presentations. And I just want to reiterate my thanks to Himanshu and Kumool. I badgered you for quite a while, and this was a very difficult time with what's going on in India. So I'm deeply grateful that you've managed to sort of find the time, amidst the kind of chaos that's kind of emerging there. My thanks to Navyug and Jasdev for coming on at relatively short notice. So, very, very many thanks indeed. We are going to be moving to publish a special issue of this, not just some of the proceedings from here, but from elsewhere in Sikh formations, very short papers, but also a couple of long ones as well. And Kumool's paper is one of those as well, which I think is going to be eagerly awaited. Other than that, the recordings will be available within a couple of weeks on this website, and Alex has forwarded the link to the site. Hopefully, Alex, if you're listening, you should have that. And the last thing I want to say is that the next webinar will be in September. We have 2 confirmed speakers that I will make the names available in a couple of weeks or so. And other than that, thank you to all the participants, to everybody in the audience who has been so patient with us. And we look forward to the next one as well. So please join us. Thank you very much. And have a good evening, a good morning, and a good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Wonderful presentations. Really excited about all the ideas, and the conversation and dialogue was fantastic. Looking forward to more.
Great.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch with you all. Thank you.